Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you. I am back in my mom's basement, and we are live now with none other than the author of the Layered Money, the author of one of my favorite newsletters that I subscribe to, the Bitcoin Layer. If you don't know him, you've been doing this wrong the whole time. Nik Bhatia, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
So, Nik, beyond just the work that you do writing about Bitcoin and writing about sort of the ongoing issues of the world that relate back to Bitcoin, I'd love to just dive right into Russia and Ukraine. You spent some time on your newsletter talking about the effects not only of just Russia's invasion, but some of these sanctions as well. And one of the things that I've really been paying attention to from your writing has been, what about Taiwan? It seems to be getting ignored often, and I'd like to start our conversation there. What are your sort of concerns? I've expressed mine on this show, but for our audience who maybe doesn't read your newsletter, talk to us a little bit about what you're looking at and what concerns you have there.
My latest thoughts on Taiwan are actually a little different than what I wrote a couple weeks ago, as I've spent more time thinking about it and researching it. I do now believe that Chinese intervention in Taiwan, or an invasion, or some sort of provocation is unlikely in the current period. The reason why, there are a couple things. Number one, we see Xi Jinping's main agenda today is this idea, or the theme, of common prosperity. Now, China goes through these eras where they name the type of economic program or cultural advance that they want to accomplish. And right now, common prosperity is coming off of the back of taking hundreds of millions of people out of the rural economy into an urban economy, now bringing those people that have gone from agrarian to urban, bringing those people into the middle class. It's not world domination or anything close to dominating the Pacific theater, expansion in an imperialist way. And so right now, I just think that China is focused internal. That's the first thing. The second thing is that China is coming off of, most likely, a period of going from a period of high growth to a period of low growth. That will again cause China to focus on its own domestic economy. It's very reliant on foreign demand for its products still, despite trying to boost its own consumption component of the economy. It's still very reliant on the export economy. It's still very reliant on dollar funding in a lot of ways from the corporate level. And it's still, it will be reliant on dollar funding going forward as well, tapping the capital markets. And so for those reasons, I don't think China is going to rock the boat. Now, that is my bias. I could be wrong. We could see something happen tomorrow. Taiwan is strategically important. The last thing I'll say on Taiwan is that we will see foundries in the United States and in Europe within the next couple of years, and reducing our United States reliance on Taiwan and Taiwanese chips. And this chip shortage that we have, we are trying to build our way out of, not negotiate in an international relations sort of way. That will reduce the United States' willingness to defend Taiwan at the aggregate. I'm not saying tomorrow, if something happened, that we wouldn't step in or anything like that, but it just doesn't seem likely that Taiwan is going to has the same strategic importance to the US in 5 years as it does today, because of new foundries and these new chip fabs. And so those are kind of my thoughts on Taiwan right now. It's a moving situation for sure.
I've been the one really pounding the drum of, I I don't mean to say it so crassly. Whatever happens in Ukraine and Russia happens, but I've been watching every bit of news with Taiwan. The moment that we sent troops over to the Ukraine about a month and a half ago now, our Navy actually went and put ships between China and Taiwan as well. You were the one who, in one of your issues of the Bitcoin layer, highlighted a tweet that essentially expressed concern from Taiwan that, hey, 9 different ships, 9 different planes from Chinese military planes. Sorry, I can't think straight for a moment there. They've been flying over our airspace as well. However, there's one thing that you actually have brought up, this idea of the debt that China has and that they carry. You brought up in the most recent issue of the Bitcoin layer, that Wall Street Journal article that really discusses like, what are all these different layers of money that people really have? And ultimately, like, whoever carries and holds that debt receipt can just say, you know what, I don't want this anymore. We're watching a little bit of these behind the table conversations with China and Russia. I selfishly and very much biased, being an Iranian citizen, I've also paid attention and seen that Iran has been meeting with China and Russia as well. And there are a lot of conversations around some of these countries that have not benefited from the US dollar system. Speaking to the essentially bag holder of all US dollars, is there a possibility, is there a world where it benefits China to bulk on and say, you know what, forget it, US, I don't want your money anymore. It's worthless. What does that scenario in your mind look like? Or is that just so out of the question?
It is out of the question right now because of see, the renminbi economy is closed. I know China likes to advertise that they're internationalizing their currency, but in reality, it is a closed account between the Chinese currency and the dollar, and the exchange rate itself is manipulated by the People's Bank of China, full stop. In that way, the renminbi economy is junior to the dollar economy from a from a monetary hierarchy perspective, from the layered money perspective. So if the US does to China what it did to Russia, China is toast. Basically, they're shut off from their own ability to finance global trade because they're not using the renminbi as much as they're using the dollar for their global trade. They're reliant on the dollar system still very heavily. So it just doesn't make sense for China to do anything to get the US to sanction them. And that will be at the front of their framework until they have built a way around that. But right now, with still over 3 trillion of dollar reserves, and it's well over that when you consider all the dollars that are held by China at Eurodollar banks around the world, et cetera. They have so many dollars, and they have also a ton of US treasuries as well. We see that with sanctions, if China was sanctioned by the United States, the treasury coupon and principal payments that they would get from their debt holdings, basically from their savings, from their first layer money, would be cut off. And Russia sold all of their treasuries in 2018. So, and they've been divesting away from the dollar in anticipation of this. China hasn't done those types of steps. Therefore, we don't think, we can't assume that China is going to do something that would get the same. And they have to use this Russian example in their framework to understand that no, we can't bomb Taiwan. Those jets that are flying over Taiwan better just continue to fly, and they will fly them. Don't get me wrong. They will continue to fly. They will continue to maneuver in the South China Sea with their Navy, and they will continue to build aircraft carriers. That's a huge one, right? Previously, it's like, the United States has all the aircraft carriers in the world and nobody has any. Well, now China's building them. So that it's not like that's going to stop, right? But in terms of like a next 12 months thing, it's definitely, in my book, it's off the table. It doesn't mean I won't be watching it closely though.
Well, I think what you make sense, especially the fact that Russia has taken the time and put in work to get themselves off of the US treasuries that they hold. They've been hoarding gold. I'm a big believer that they've been secretly hoarding and acquiring Bitcoin very quietly. However that looks, is there a scenario though, or not, let me rephrase. Are there instances or certain triggers that China could do to flip the script? And what are those beyond just the idea of bulking on the debt or actually being aggressive with Taiwan? What are sort of very quiet and subtle actions that maybe would go over the average person's head, would probably go over most of our own politicians' heads, but people like us would pay attention and raise alarm bells on?
The number one thing we should watch from China in terms, and I think what I assume you're asking about is in the whole monetary reset conversation here. So, we've gone from Bretton Woods 1 to now Bretton Woods 3 kind of in the last few weeks in terms of Zoltan Posar's definition. He's somebody that people are starting to follow a lot now, which I think is great. He's one of the originators of the monetary hierarchy framework that I based layered money off of. So I'm thrilled to see Zoltan like growing in popularity and people reading his work. So in this transition to Bretton Woods 3 from Bretton Woods 2, where in Bretton Woods 1, gold is the first layer money, and Bretton Woods 2, US Treasuries are the first layer money. And in Bretton Woods 3, it's a big question mark, and it's US Treasuries / something to do with China / something to do with gold / something to do with Bitcoin, right? And so that's the question mark that we have today. What will China do on the path to Bretton Woods 3 and to continue to establish itself as a geopolitical player? It will use the digital renminbi as an international settlement tool. And it will force, when it can and where it can, it will force its counterparties, so multinational corporations or foreign governments, Latin American, African, even European, to accept, whether even if it's for a moment before they swap it, accept digital renminbi as a monetary instrument. Get them familiar with it, get them a wallet, get them in the network, get them surveilled. So China's CBDC and how it exercises or how it uses that CBDC to gain influence on the global stage, not with the United States, but everywhere else as it spreads its tentacles with the One Belt, One Road initiative and their infrastructure projects all over the world. That's something that I'm looking for from China, to understand that they are indeed trying to put the digital renminbi within that conversation of the top of the hierarchy or part of the conversation of what is considered money at the global scale, what can and cannot be cut off. Because now we have to think about whether the money has an off switch or not. That's what the last few weeks have taught us and have taught everyone, really, where the Wall Street Journal's article is about this. Zoltan is talking about this itself. Does your money have an on or off switch? If it's an inside money, meaning it's liability money from a balance sheet, or in my framework, second or third layer money, it's going to have an off switch. So what type of off switch does your money have? I think it's important. Who has control of that off switch is important. And is there money that doesn't have an off switch? And that can only be answered in two ways. With yes for two things: gold and Bitcoin. Nothing else can be argued that it doesn't have an off switch. So I think that that's how I'm thinking about China. It's in terms of their digital renminbi.
We will have to be keeping a very close eye on this digital renminbi. Everyone watching, please be sure to keep your eyes out for that as well. And let's all learn from what Nik is teaching us here. I want to present something now to you so that we can have a conversation around oil. I know that my framework in this question is not the correct framework, but oil is now reaching all-time highs yet again. Russia controls much of the oil and gas for Europe, not so much for us over here in America, I think Biden's actions were more a signal of support to European and to the European efforts as well as to Ukrainians rather than an actual effect on what we will feel. That didn't stop oil and gas prices to get to $6 a gallon for unleaded gas over here in Los Angeles. Um, at what point do some countries that have insane oil reserves start to introduce oil as a form of money, whether it's, hey, our dollar is now just going to be backed by the 100 million barrels of oil we have. You don't want it, that's fine, but this is now more valuable than gold in some regards, in some places, for some people.
So Q, I'll answer it in a way that's close to home to you. We saw Iran and India engage in gold for oil swap years ago during certain sanctions. So the answer to your question is that it already exists as something that is front of mind for nations that it pertains to. Okay, like Iran. Okay, Iran has to understand that its oil is black gold. It can use real gold and black gold in trade because the two are real and they have a price, and they can be put on ships and sent from point A to point B. So it is already something that is front of mind. One thing that is important from the Chinese perspective is that gold and oil contracts settling in Shanghai have been active for years. And so China already understands this, and it is in their framework. Because when we're talking about asset classes, commodities, Bitcoin, gold, oil, and you get the argument that a Bitcoin's not a currency because it's volatile. Everything is volatile, and everything has a hedging market because everything moves in price relative to other things. So a bank will make you a market in an oil for dollar swap, oil for gold, oil for renminbi, Bitcoin for dollars, Bitcoin for oil. They'll make you a market in anything as long as they can make a spread. And they do the spread by, what do? That when they sell, let's say you want to go long, they sell you a short, they write a contract, then they go and long into the market with somebody else, maybe another bank, and they do so at a level where they capture a spread and their risk goes to zero. They have zero delta, right? Means they don't have any exposure to the price. They don't care. They're bankers. They're not gamblers, right? They are, and so we have a very sophisticated hedging market for every single asset class. It exists for Bitcoin as well. Now it's growing, and it's existed for oil for many decades. It's one of the original use cases for the online global futures marketplace. And the fact that we only have less than 36 hours when the market is closed on weekends, because it closes in New York and opens in New Zealand, and on Sunday afternoon for us here in LA. So that would be my answer there. It's already in the framework, and it doesn't get a lot of mainstream attention, let's say, because it's the same thing as people criticizing Bitcoin for not being a currency because it's volatile. It just fails to understand that every asset has its place, and every asset can be hedged into or out of depending on use cases and actual demand. So, let's always remember Iran and India, but also the fact that China and Russia have been doing bilateral trade without the dollar for oil for many, many years now as well.
I'd love to also maybe have you dive in a little bit deeper on just, oil is being touted as almost this sort of like carrot at the end of the stick during this entire conflict. We saw before Ukraine was invaded by Russia, the Russia finance minister announced, hey, we do not want to be involved in Bitcoin, essentially trying to push Bitcoin away from Russia. Within 24 hours, Vladimir Putin comes out and says, actually, we have such a competitive advantage, given all of the energy we have, given our natural gas mining, we should be a world leader in Bitcoin. And I am pushing our government to figure out a way to incorporate Bitcoin, whatever that looks like. not too long after that, Russia invades Ukraine. Do you view these as a connected issue, or are these two separate issues that are eventually going to be connected?
What is Bretton Woods 3? It is a transition of the monetary system from the past to the present to the future, right? And Bitcoin has a role in Bretton Woods 3. Today, that role is small, but we all know it's going to grow. How fast it's going to grow and how fast it's going to reach the top, nobody knows. And it's silly to speculate there. What is not silly to speculate on is the fact that it is growing in importance. So Putin's move to embrace Bitcoin is related to Bretton Woods 3. What he's doing on the global stage, is a result of the fact that we are transitioning into a world where we don't need US treasuries by themselves to sustain the financial system. But make no mistake, US treasuries are still the instrument that holds the whole dollar system together. So, we talk about potentially, the US interest rates, going up in the face of inflation. What we really should be thinking about is what will happen to US treasuries when inflation starts to impair the economy and real companies start to default. And what happens to all those trillions in credit issued to the public sector, not to the US that can print its own money and get the central bank to buy its debt if it needs to, but what's going to happen to everyone else? And one thing I think that isn't as understood is this crowding out effect that US treasuries have on the rest of the world economy. When the treasury supply grows, yes, the yields might increase, but then the demand is always there. The auctions are always bid, means somebody has to sell something else to buy US treasuries. And what is that something else? It's stocks, it's other bonds. And so, I still think US treasuries hold their role because it holds the dollar together. I still think interest rates, even though they could go up over the next year with inflation, they're still in this 40-year downtrend. And it's a demographic gravity towards zero interest rates, just based off of, all of the other debt in the dollar system. It keeps treasuries very well bid.
Right after the announcement, or not announcement, right after Russia had invaded Ukraine and off of Powell's statements, had discussed the idea that, hey, the 50 basis point hike from the Fed is probably not going to be a thing. We will see some. What effect is that going to have both on our economy here and on a global stage for these treasuries? Because if it starts to devalue and all of a sudden we turn into a system where we're hurting our own currency value, what incentive do these other countries have to actually sell equities that are appreciating in value to buy something that historically may have worked, but is right now not working?
So it comes down to the risk spectrum. If things are going poorly across the world, stocks will sell off, and if things are going well, stocks will do well. And that's kind of the basic way to think of things. So if things are not going well across the world, companies are going to have trouble in an economy. That's when we're in recession. Right now, we're in an inflationary environment, which is causing its own problems. So certain companies are benefiting from the inflation, others are being hurt from it. And so it's dangerous to correlate one thing to the other. I think there's so many different asset classes and so many different forces on US interest rates. But in general, I believe that with so much debt out in the system, and remember, a lot of the stock market valuation is due to margin lending as well. When interest rates go up and we have a tightening on the economy, liquidity of the products that are generally thin in liquidity in a bear market, that's why we say stairs up, elevator down. That's where you see the elevator down in prices. And we see that in cryptocurrency as well, not just Bitcoin. We see it all across. When things are going well, it takes the stairs up. But then when when margin calls happen, you see 30% drops all of a sudden. That type of price action, and that type of that type of selling, you end up liquidating your position and buying a money market fund, which is driving treasury yields lower. And so there are chain reactions when interest rates rise and financial conditions tighten, which ends up causing US treasuries to be bid and interest rates to go back lower. So right now, your question about the hikes, right? Right now, we will see the Fed hiking rates, right? We'll see it next week. They'll hike 25. We'll probably see another 25 in June. We'll probably see them maybe, just to continue to hike 25 every meeting. They will do that for a period of time because monetary policy works with a 12-month lag. So they're not even, it's not even intellectually honest to judge what their interest rate hikes are doing to the economy until 6 to 12 months have passed by. So we will see a series of hikes. I don't know how long they'll be able to do it. My suspicion is that they will be able to hike north of 1%. So that means, let's say, the first 4 hikes. I think they'll be able to do that without blowing up the world. I do think that monetary policy does work with a 6 to 12 month lag. So you won't actually see the effects of a 25 basis point interest rate hike in March until September or December or next March. So I think that for the time being, we will see the Fed hike. I think they will get the first 3 to 4 hikes without a problem. Then we'll see. We'll see how it's going. We'll also see if they knock off risk markets before and they have to reverse course. My suspicion is that we will see more than 1 hike. We will see more than 2 hikes. We'll see them get to 1%. And I have some suspicion that they'll even be able to continue beyond that, given where inflation is today, that they will be motivated to raise rates to 2%. Whether or not they can get there, it's way too early to speculate on that. But that's what I'm gonna be watching, and I'm definitely committed to communicating that the Fed will be hiking at least its first few times, and that it won't be scared by a little drawdown in stocks. Listen, the NASDAQ is down 20% from its highs, and the Fed has not flinched, neither have the short-term interest rate markets. They are still continuing to price in 150 basis points of hikes until December, which is a pretty aggressive path. So we'll wait and see.
I'm a little curious, and I want to make sure I'm following you properly here. When you say that these markets may not, or the markets won't really feel the effects for 6 to 12 months, as you mentioned, NASDAQ is down 20%. S&P is not yet there, but I do believe it will get there shortly after. Are you talking in the equities market, or where are you discussing that?
Yes. When I say monetary policy works with a 6 to 12 month lag, we're talking about the real economy and how borrowing conditions affect the real economy. Okay. That happens with a 6 to 12 month lag. The stock market and other markets do not work with any lag. They are leading indicators. Okay. So maybe this 20% drawdown is pricing in the first 100 basis points of hikes. Maybe it's pricing in the first 25 basis points of hikes. We won't know until the market reacts along the way. Listen, Q, price is truth. You know that if you've watched me or read me, you know I say it all the time. The price will tell us what is happening. Right now, the price of the short-term interest rate market is telling us that the Fed will be hiking this year. It's also telling us, the stock market price is also telling us that it's not the end of the world, but we're nervous as fuck. Okay, with the volatility that is, just generally increasing across asset classes. Credit is nervous, meaning high yield credit. Stocks are nervous. Oil and gold are both rallying off of not really the Fed, but other things, war and Bretton Woods 3. And Bitcoin is kind of just chopping around in the war, kind of just flat, hanging in there, which is really interesting. And I think a little exciting for people that have been tiring of the correlation with equities, but it still is demonstrating some of that. And yeah, so I hope that answers your question about what, what is that 6 to 12 month lag? It's the real economy, but the price of stocks, the price of yields, yields themselves will tell us what is happening. And so that's why I always have my eye glued to price, because if you have to communicate what the price is communicating to you. And that is what I try to do in the Bitcoin layer. What I will provide you snapshots of where prices are today, where they have been over the last few weeks, which tells a story. And that's as far as we can look without getting into just raw speculation, which it's fun to do, but we have to call that what it is, and then call the analysis what it is as well. So we'll see. I think the stock market hangs in there amidst these first few interest rate hikes, and we don't get that 50% correction, but that's just a guess.
To speculate for a brief moment here, we watched Powell attempt to do something like this, not with the geopolitical background he has now coming off of a 2-year pandemic. However, in 2018, when he did attempt to raise rates, did it a little too quickly, markets suffered as a result. At what point do you think he or the Fed stops this tightening? Is it going to be a stock market issue? Is it going to be more of we are entering a war, we need to make money cheap to be accessible? Where is that pure speculation, of course?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the liquidity of bank funding, and that's always what it comes down to. So when banks aren't able to roll their funding to the next day and they're facing default, that's what catapults the financial system, and that's when the Fed will stop. So that's why stocks going down even 50% doesn't knock the Fed off of their rocker. What would is high yield spreads going out 1,000 basis points, and then certain banks that have that on their balance sheet unable to roll their repo financing, and then they're facing default, for example, like a major bank somewhere. That's the type of thing that will get the Fed going. So what should we be watching? Of course, we watch stocks, because stocks are a general leading indicator and can give us the sense of what liquidity is like in the market, because stocks do trade on margin, right? There's a fundamental cost basis. There's of stocks, there's a level at which the long-term buyers will say, I'm definitely buying here. And then the rest is trading margin. We see that in Bitcoin as well. We have a realized price, which it never really goes below. Sometimes it does, but it bounces right back above. And then we'll see huge rallies where we go to 3-4 times the realized price. And a lot of that is margin. It can be wiped out, whether in 3 days, 3 months. And so we'll watch stocks, but we watch the steepening of the yield curve. Here's something that I haven't written about, okay? I've used the word flattening nonstop in the newsletter you guys have read. We always talk about the flattening. Why? Because rates continue to flatten. When rates steepen, you know that the rates market is pricing in the rate cuts and the policy reversal. So until the yield curve steepens, the market is not telling you that the Fed is going to reverse course. So we'll watch the yield curve. Right now, it's, let's say, the 2s10s curve is at about 30 basis points, which means it's still positively sloped from 2s to 10s. And it's been flattening for a while. It could go to 0. That curve could go negative. But when it starts to increase again and go steeper, that means that the market is pricing in lower short-term interest rates relative to long-term interest rates. And right now, the market is pricing in higher short-term interest rates, but no change, in the long-term interest rate. And that's why the curve flattens. So to answer your question, it's when the curve steepens. And that's why I'm signaling the flattener, and it continue to be, because it means the Fed is still into this idea that they're going to hike.
That makes perfect sense. And for for anyone else like me who reads it and hears a lot about the idea of flattening the curve, or even just the idea of rate hikes, this helps you visualize it a lot better. During this rate hike period, this is that steepening of the curve that you were talking about. Correct, Nick? I'm
Well,
understanding.
when rates are being hiked, the short term yields are increasing.
Right.
The long-term yields aren't really moving anywhere. They're about flat since the war started, and they are higher off of the pandemic, but they haven't increased nearly as much as short-term yields have increased. That is a flattening of the yield curve. So when they hike, they're flattening the yield curve. When they stop hiking, the market will price in cuts, and the yield curve will re-steepen.
Got it.
So we have not seen any re-steepening. We are still in the flattening period, which means we're still in the market pricing in hikes.
Got it.
When it starts to re-steepen aggressively, that's the market telling you the Fed is done hiking, short-term yields are coming back down. Even if the hikes never get to where the yields were pricing them in, they'll come back down to price in the cuts, back to zero. So we're nowhere near any steepening trends establishing themselves. But when we are, I'll flag it for you guys.
I look forward to that. We now haven't really spent a ton of time on Bitcoin, and I'd love to spend, I think, as much time as possible here on out just discussing Bitcoin and its role on the global stage. We've watched it in Canada show its importance of being a censorship resistant money. We're watching in both Ukraine and Russia, people who are losing value on all of their money, trying to hide it elsewhere or try to get out of the country in a safe and reliable way. Ukraine limiting how much money you can take out, Russia doing similar actions. What are you proud of about Bitcoin on this global stage, and what are you nervous about with Bitcoin on this global stage?
Yeah, I'm not nervous about anything. What I'm proud of is the display of Bitcoiners in teaching and showing how we can use Bitcoin today in these incredibly important times to help save lives. And I'm not nervous about the fact that what happened in Canada, what happened in Russia and Ukraine with Bitcoiners, Bitcoin education, Bitcoin adoption. I'm not nervous that didn't increase the price or any, let's say, immediately measurable adoption metric of Bitcoin. Okay. The reason that I'm not nervous about that is because we know we can feel it in the culture that we advanced Bitcoin one step further in Canada, one step further in Ukraine, one step further in Russia. And we're able to battle the Russia narrative with the Ukrainian example that, look, Ukraine is using Bitcoin too. This is not about Putin using Bitcoin. It's about Bitcoin being there for anything. And that's one of the narratives that I'm extremely happy. It's very hard to duck that narrative if you want to put Bitcoin in a bad light because you're associating it with Vladimir Putin and his aggressive invasion of Ukraine. So I'm very proud of the marginal adoption of Bitcoin by people in countries that have use cases due to the selfless education efforts of Bitcoiners. I'm not on the ground in any of those countries. There are people on the ground giving wallets, explaining things, teaching their fellow countrymen and women how to use Bitcoin, why it's important, spreading the message. Everybody that has gone on a media interview over the last few weeks on TV, on radio, any podcast, and said to a general audience, not the Bitcoiners, we already know why Bitcoin is here for that, but to everyone else, hey, this is Bitcoin. This is why it's important. They're all heroes. They're all doing the work that we need to advance Bitcoin adoption worldwide. Bitcoin is a unifying force. It's mutually accepted across continents and cultures. It's something I've talked about. It's what makes it so special. And so I'm proud of the educational effort, because we can't, it's it's not even it's not even right to say, oh, this Russia-Ukraine conflict should cause a rise in the Bitcoin price because it will bring attention. That's not what this is about. It should bring long-term adoption and understanding of Bitcoin as a necessity and as an important geopolitical force and cultural force, societal force. And that builds up over a long time. So I, recently said that not into hyper Bitcoinization from the explicit of it having happening really fast. I'm into a slow Bitcoinization process because that's how we teach the world about something. You want to get a billion people on the same page in terms of monetary reality, it's going to take time. So that's why I write. You reach each person one at a time. Maybe they will make a decision for their family. Maybe they will make a decision for their multinational corporation. Maybe they will make a decision for their nation, right? Who did Bukele read to trigger him into all that? Not me, somebody, right? And, I don't know that his whole Bitcoin origin story, but there's somebody that helped him. There's somebody that helped me. I'm helping others. And we all have to educate each other about this idea that we think we're in Bitcoin because we think it can make for a better society and a better culture. The money will help the culture. The money will help the society, not that it's the better money. Why do we need better money? So we have a better society. So that's why we're in it. You ask any Bitcoiner that's really in it, they care about the race. They're not traders. They're in it for our human race. And it's very apparent when you talk to Bitcoiners. It's why we all get along really well, is because we at least have that in common, that we want to help people, and we think it's more fair. That's an important thing. We think it's a more fair way to conduct a monetary system. That's the critique of fiat and where all that stuff comes in, and Saifedean's important work on time preference and how we think about time preference as well. So if we push the message of Bitcoin and time preference and all these shared realities that we can share about Bitcoin, then I think that we're all doing our part.
I think you say it best, and it deserves a thank you from all of us at Bitcoin, because you have been slowly but surely, one by one, helping people to see that light. I am one of those people that you have helped educate. I do want to two-part, maybe more of a statement and then a question to follow. When we're talking about sort of this, we have to chip away one at a time. You make mention in one of your previous posts about just Bitcoin adoption happening at the margin. And it doesn't matter if it's just one person at a time, whether it's an uber wealthy oligarch or just a middle-class family realizing this is what they need. And that is in essence what you've just described and outlined for us here. I am, however, a little curious, a little selfish. There is the narrative that the media will always push, that this is now Putin's new weapon. We've seen various articles come out of this ilk or of this theme that, hey, Bitcoin is helping Russia. We can't, Bitcoin supports the bad guys. Canada pushed forward saying, hey, if you send Bitcoin to these truckers, you're now a terrorist. What are some things that we as just individuals can have in our back pocket that you maybe would recommend us sort of point to and say, hey, this is how I counter the discussion of Putin's not really the weapon. Ukraine's also using it. Justin Trudeau shouldn't have been taking away anyone's access to money to begin with. What are other sort of themes or topics that we can be using to help educate people?
Yeah, you have to counter the Russia with the Ukraine, show them the tweet from the government itself raising funds. But, to be very honest, I think this is one of the most important things that we have to do, is explain Bitcoin as a good force and not as a bad force. And so, any story that you can find about how it helps people avoid, because people understand dictators, right? So they understand Putin and then they associate. But how do you use Bitcoin to escape the actions of dictators, not how dictators are using Bitcoin? So like with Maduro or, other places where people are using Bitcoin as a freedom tool. That is how to counter the argument. Explain Bitcoin as a freedom tool and that anybody can use it. Anybody can use any tool for good or for bad. And it really is, you have to shock them into how oversimplistic it is of thinking to associate a technology with bad people and end the argument without looking at the other side of the coin. We do have to shake people out of these, like wake them up, jolt them into like, hey, do you understand how you just were programmed to associate Bitcoin with Putin, and you didn't even factor in the fact that the people on the other side that are being bombed are raising money in Bitcoin to defend themselves, even if it saved one life.
Absolutely.
And you just have to, you can't just let the narrative run over us anymore. We've gone so far past the Silk Road. I mean, we're so far away from that, that end that line of questioning quickly, swiftly and quickly. Move on to the next topic, because there are a lot of other things to critique Bitcoin in terms of it's not ready to step in to Bretton Woods 3 today. That's a legitimate critique. Why is it not ready? It's not big enough. It's not old enough. It's there aren't as many nodes as there could be. The mining is sufficiently decentralized. The hash power is strong enough to support it. There is market value to accommodate international cross-border commerce, but it's not ready to replace gold or US treasuries today. Let's talk about that and how we get there. Not silly media narratives that really can be combated quickly. The same thing for the energy thing, the boiling the oceans one. End it quickly. Methane capture. End it quickly. You gotta. We are armed now. I always point people to Nick Carter's writing on the energy stuff. It's an easy fix. The Ukraine one is one tweet now. You don't even have to like send them to an article. It's right in front of you. So that would be my advice to people. And the little teaser is the next book is going to be the next bit of armor for people to respond. Bitcoin is a force for good, and we have to understand it in a cultural context. And that is what my second book will be about.
I have been dying to ask about that as you've teased it a little bit in your newsletter, suggesting something big is going to come out. I know that you've touched a little bit about what you're going to discuss. Can you share a little bit more details, perhaps, about what some of our audience, what I'm looking forward to reading in your next book?
Right. So something that maybe people noticed or didn't, but when I went to write Layered Money, I stopped the media and I stopped writing. I almost pretty much stopped tweeting, because at a certain point now I have to go write it and execute so that I'm not so that the ideas are as focused as they can be. So these interviews that I'm doing over the next couple of months will be my last for the year as I basically transition back into a full writing mode for book number 2. And so in these last couple months, with the few interviews that I'm going to be able to do, readers and listeners will get the first kind of whiff of the idea here before I go, and sink my teeth into it. And it really is this idea that Bitcoin is something that we share, and it does transcend cultures and continents. And the reason that it transcends is because it is so unique in human history. There's something about Bitcoin that will get us to 1 billion believers. And so I'll I'll kind of just end with that word in terms of believers. And that is the way that I am framing my research now, going forward. And that's what I'll say. It's a book about Bitcoin. It will have elements of history in it, and it will have elements of Bitcoin today and its role in society. And I'm extremely excited to get going on it. The past few weeks have really seen it take off. In terms of my brainstorming is now, I find myself thinking about the book a whole lot, whereas I haven't ever, I mean, since Layered Money, I've tried to think about what to write next and it just wouldn't come. Now it's hitting me. And so I'm going to, do my best to balance the Bitcoin layer with my book, because the Bitcoin layer is about Bitcoin today and what's happening, and the markets and global macro. I don't anticipate that there's going to be a ton of rates or global macro explicitly in my next book. And so that will allow me to balance the Bitcoin layer with the writing of the second book. And I do hope readers will stick with me through the writing of the book. I do anticipate the same sort of frequency in terms of writing once a week or so, keeping people up to date on my analysis, what I'm thinking. And but in terms of pods and tweets, it'll be quietly into the night, I think, for a while. And but I'm very excited for that, and it's a blessing to be able to take that journey again, for sure.
I can only say how excited I am, and I'm sure many of our viewers are equally excited, if not more, for the next book to come out, while also being a little sad to hear that we won't be hearing your voice and hearing you articulate your thoughts out. But I will be frequently checking for those emails to come in as well, as I find your analysis on the global stage is just very helpful, because you ignore all the noise. You cut right to it and you essentially say, these are the facts. This is how I, Nik Bhatia, interpret them. And this is what maybe are certain scenarios that could play out and how we should react accordingly to it. It's vastly helpful when I read people who are immensely smarter than I help articulate things that maybe go over my head. Sorry, please.
No, I appreciate that a lot. And the Bitcoin layer is a chance for me to express my opinion on a regular basis. And the fact that people subscribe, and that some are even paying subscribers or founding members, is ridiculously motivational, because they're basically saying, what you have put out, we embrace and we want more of. So I can't thank the subscribers enough. It means a lot.
I do want to ask you, and I don't know if you had the chance, Biden released this executive order. There seems to be a lot of emphasis on a CBDC. What, if any, effect does this have on Bitcoin's place on US legislation, or is this just, noise, flash in the pan type of stuff?
Yes. So readers of Layered Money will know that I predicted a US CBDC, a Fed coin, toward the end of the book. I think it will be an important political tool for the US government and the Federal Reserve in their own individual rights. The Fed will find power and utility from a Fed coin. The US government will find power and utility from a Fed coin. So we will see one, and it will affect policy. It will potentially reshape fiscal and monetary policy in this country. And so it's important to watch what will happen to the United States of America with a CBDC. It will impact policy. That's what I'll say about, the initial announcement, is that, yes, we've seen this coming. It will happen, and it will be a and if you want to think about the branches of government, it'll be a three-pronged approach: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the Fed. And then the judicial branch will probably have to rule on it at some point as well, when somebody sues, the Fed for Fed coin. So, and the judicial branch will rule on that, and we'll go forward. So you'll have, and that's not even to mention the agencies involved. So you have a bunch of parts of the US government touch this over the next few years, and we'll see something come out. And it will, in terms of how much actionable analysis is there based on the announcement yesterday, I don't think a whole lot. I think we understood that there'll be elements of UBI in there, there'll be elements of fiscal payments, there'll be elements of modernizing the monetary rails. There's elements of all of that, and that is to be expected. How does it affect Bitcoin? It's bullish for Bitcoin because it shows us that we're in the new era of digital currency. In Layered Money, I showed how price settlement of digital currencies based off of atomic swaps or even P2P escrow accounts, that you can discover prices of one digital currency versus another. We will see Bitcoin emerge as an arbitrage mechanism for digital currencies, including central bank digital currencies and stablecoins, over the long term. So it just reinforces that we are in the Bitcoin era. The word blockchain, the word crypto, the word CBDC, the word stablecoin are all derivatives of Satoshi Nakamoto's innovation. And that will never, so in an academic setting, you have to, explain why you're explaining something the way it is. Well, if we take a Bitcoin first approach to research, it is because it came first in a line of academic studies and progressions in cryptography and applied mathematics and all of that. So Bitcoin is the innovation that separates the past from the future. So anything associated with Bitcoin is bullish for Bitcoin. And it will, one day it'll show people that the Fed can seize your money, censor you, the government can put you in jail because you spent your Fed coin here or there, and then they'll go to Bitcoin and you'll have another marginal adopter. And then the press will say, look, Bitcoin is only for criminals because the government put someone in jail for spending their Bitcoin in the wrong place, and the cycle will continue, but the marginal adopter will always be there.
I am kind of curious on something that you mentioned very briefly. The CBDC will give sort of the Fed and the federal government in particular a little bit more oversight and control of our financial systems. However, and I literally just pulled this up on statista.com. So grain of salt of how accurate this information is. In 2020, only 12% of our POS point of sales transactions were done with cash, and that figure dropped down to 11% in 2021. So it's suggesting that there are almost 90, so high 80% of transactions are done digitally. In theory, I would argue that all of these are able to be vetted by the government just as easily as us transacting the CBDC. So what is really happening? Can you break down that difference of the CBDC gives them more control in this aspect, in this facet? They're able to pull this transaction to say, hey, actually, you know what? No, you're not allowed to spend that money there. Like, buy. Is that a possibility, or what does that?
Yeah, let's say the government, suspects somebody of something and they want to shut them off, right? We talked about money having the on-off switch. They have to call Chase and get Chase to do it. That could take 24 hours. It could take 48 hours. It could take 3 hours, or it can take 4 seconds now. So it is different. It's not the same. It is an additional tool for surveillance and for control. It changes who has the on-off switch in their hand. And that's, I think that's the way to think about the surveillance. Yes, you're correct. The government can have all the Visa records, all the Chase records, all the Wells Fargo records, all the PayPal records, but it has to use some subpoenas, some influence, something. And maybe the 11% figure is something that they're not a big fan of. They wish they could have more cash usage, and they say, oh, use our Fed coin. It's, you don't have to deal with the commercial bank. You can use it anywhere. And so we'll see, how that unfolds. But I do think that a Fed coin is coming to everyone's pocket. And one day they will try to do away with paper money. Not anytime soon, because the world is actually quite reliant on paper US dollars circulating abroad to function. And, So, that's a long, but the European Central Bank, maybe, yeah. No paper in 5 years or so, something like that in Europe. I think it's completely possible.
Purely speculating at this point, but do you envision a just one for one swap where all paper dollars become obsolete and it's now we're going to issue the CBDC? Foreign governments let us know how much dollars you have and we'll transfer the appropriate amount to you. Individuals to make, I absolutely agree with the UBI argument. If you're making less than a certain threshold, we're going to replace all of the money in your bank account with the CBDC and then some to incentivize, oh, I get free money if we do this, I'm on board. Is that a scenario you envision, or what does in your world that scenario look like?
Yeah, something like a 365-day rollout of the currency, a window to swap it, something like that. Yeah, incentives, free $10 to open your Fed coin wallet with Wells Fargo on your Wells Fargo app, get your Fed coin widget within your Wells Fargo app, get 10 free dollars in there. And then Wells Fargo will try to get you to sell it for Wells Fargo deposits by offering you a higher interest rate or Wells Fargo coin. And that is the future that we're in for. People can use Chapter 9 of layered money as kind of a loose guide into a world where we will have Bitcoin, Wells Fargo coin, and Fed coin maybe all in the same app. In the future, we'll seamlessly swap between. Maybe, I don't know what the UI will look like, but we will have different settlement layers, different tokens in the digital economy, and Bitcoin will pretty much remain the only thing without an on-off switch and with complete sovereign, ability to sovereignly control. And for that reason, Bitcoin will remain unique for forever.
My head hurt a little bit envisioning a world where the likes of Bank of America and Wells Fargo, on top of the way that they've abused the current fiat system, will then be given the opportunity to go ahead and create their own token as they see fit. Like, my head actually hurts imagining that. So
Well, that will be the one-for-one swap that you're actually talking about, where your deposit will go away and you'll just have a token in the same amount. And so the deposit rails, which is the old way of doing business, will be gone, and the new way will be the stable coin that they've issued you in lieu of the deposit. So something like that I envision from commercial banking. And yeah, it does hurt your brain a little bit when you think about the abuse of banking liabilities. So stablecoin is just another type of banking liability, and it's why people should be wary of where their stable coins are coming from and who's issuing them.
I'm going to make a ridiculous speculative sort of idea announcement to put in the back of everyone's heads who are listening or watching right now. Nostalgia has been hot. It's been hot for generations. I will definitely be keeping $1 bill, a $5 bill, 10, 20, and 100, and just one of each. Maybe to make it fun, I'll get it from the last year they're ever minted, and my grandkids will get it, and I'll be like, there was a time where this was. Our producer Chris is holding up the bill. Is it $1 billion or $1 trillion? $1 trillion bill from Zimbabwe that he showed everyone yesterday. So I'm gonna make that claim right now that everyone should, before it's too late, have just one of each bill for your grandkids to show them that there was actually paper money that we used to transact back in our day.
Chris, I have one of those. I have one of those Zimbabwe notes. I was just looking for it somewhere here. Yeah, 100 trillion. Yeah.
I do want to. This is a question from YouTube, a little off topic. If you wouldn't mind entertaining it, can you talk a little bit about balance of trade and balance of payments in the Bitcoin denominated world? The question asker is guessing that they would essentially go away, but what are the implications if they do?
That's a really interesting question. Balance of trade and balance of payments are not going away. We're always going to have debts between countries based on what people are producing. So to see Bitcoin used as cross-border trade tool, whether to have debt, debits or credits in terms of the balance of trade and cross-border, it's not even something I've thought about, but something that you'll have to see to evolve toward a Bitcoin standard, or at least to see what I do predict is that companies and countries having to dual denominate their balance sheets in Bitcoin and local, or Bitcoin and dollars, because half or approaching half or a significant portion of their business is being done and conducted in Bitcoin. So they'll have to run dual balance sheets. So that's kind of what I'm watching for, is how the dual denominated balance sheet world evolves. Right now, you have 0 countries and 0 multinational corporations doing dual denominated Bitcoin and dollar accounting. So we have only to go up from here.
Yeah, I buy into the dual denominator. I even think of a more basket of currencies, if you will, where Bitcoin, along with the dollar and maybe gold and some other currencies that survive this sort of Bretton Woods 3 that we are living through. What in a scenario like that, what are things that you are keeping an eye out that could potentially be incorporated in that beyond the dollar, gold, and Bitcoin?
Yeah, so there was a big trend toward SDR, which is the special drawing rights from the IMF, over the last several years, but it just seemed to die off as support for it just seemed to die off over the last few years. As I think I haven't read the word SDR once since the Russian war started, and I think that's evidence that that idea is dead. So it is a big question mark. What does Bretton Woods 3 look like? And I think the word basket is wrong. I think you won't see a basket anywhere. You'll see fractured systems and parallel systems and side, systems. Like the Bitcoin system is on the side. It's not in a basket with the dollar and gold in the Chinese eyes, right? So China will, let's say Russia will use gold. It will have cross-border trade in gold. It will have cross-border trade in Bitcoin. It will have cross-border trade in renminbi. It won't do a basket of renminbi, gold, and Bitcoin with Brazil. I don't see a basket being part of the conversation, or the word basket really coming in any serious way. Even though some central banks might say, let's say, emerging market central bank might say, well, we hold a basket of dollars, euros, and renminbi. That's okay. They hold a basket, but they're not necessarily having a balance sheet that's denominated in a basket, or using that sort of actionable basket sort of tool as an instrument. I don't see that.
That makes absolute sense. I had one more question that I am now, for whatever reason, it does not want to come out of my mouth. Oh my God, it really does not want to come out of my head anymore. Nik, when, if and when, one last speculative question, if Russia is the next country to adopt Bitcoin in any capacity, either legalize it, legal tender, that leaves us only El Salvador and Russia in the midst of a conflict with Russia. Long-term beneficial to Bitcoin. In the short term, what does that look like from a US policy as well as a global policy on Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's not great. It's not great branding. So I'll say that I will hope that Russia doesn't do anything that other countries aren't duplicating at the same time. And I think that what we'll see from Russia is a framework for cryptocurrency to exist within the banking system, which will mimic what you'll see in a lot of other countries. So I don't think Russia will make an announcement that says Bitcoin is legal tender in our country. And for that reason, it's probably good for Bitcoin branding if that doesn't happen. But at the same time, their banking framework and embracing cryptocurrency, that will be duplicated when in 22 and 23 across the world in different countries. So, El Salvador might be the only country that has Bitcoin as legal tender for another 12 months still. But I think that within the next 12, 24 months, you'll see many other countries coming on board with an official framework, official regulatory, framework, and legalization, a place in legal precedent, all those important things to get people using Bitcoin.
May those words ring true, and hopefully it is not Russia, but somewhere else that does adopt. And if it's the US, that would be just the bee's knees at that point. Nik holding up the USA and his on his Ryder Cup sweater. Nik, I know that you've mentioned you're not necessarily going to be on Twitter too much towards the end of the year. His Twitter handle is time value BTC for those who do want to follow him in the intermediary. Where can our viewers and listeners get subscribed to the Bitcoin Layer? In addition, if you haven't, go read Layered Money. It's required reading. I gave you all homework yesterday. If you have a new homework assignment, go read Layered Money. But can you let our audience know where they can subscribe to your newsletter?
Sure. So the bitcoinlayer.substack.com is where people can subscribe. You can find all of my links though at layeredmoney.com, which is a little easier to remember. So at layeredmoney.com, you can subscribe to the Bitcoin Layer. You can find books you can find links to the book in paperback, in the ebook, the audio book. Several foreign language translations are also on there as well. So, and people, can find my Twitter link as well at time value of BTC. So I appreciate everyone's support, all the readers out there of Layered Money and my Substack publication, the Bitcoin Layer. I very much appreciate all your support and encouragement as we head into the next writing season.
Awesome, Nik. Thank you so much for joining us, man. I know that you have tons on your plate and we will let you get back to it. In the meantime, do not forget, for those of you who have not yet purchased your tickets, use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your Bitcoin 22 conference tickets. We are 27 days out. I think I land in Miami in 24 days. So, you know the drill. Use code YTMAG, get 10% off. And if you find me in Miami, we'll chat. We'll have some fun. We might even smoke a joint. Who knows? We're going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then we'll be joined by Casey for a new, really exciting episode of Meet the Plebs. Stick around, guys, and we'll be back shortly. We are live. We are back, and I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Casey. How you doing, guy?
Dude, amazing. As you were just saying before the break, we are getting closer and closer to the Bitcoin conference. And every single day, I just get more excited thinking about our time in Miami, man.
Dude, I mean, if our last meetup in Nashville was any indication, we're going to have a blast. If you don't realize what Casey is wearing on his head, that is a hat from Bitcoin 21, last year's conference. A reminder, we're 27 days out from this year's conference. use code YTMAG and get 10% off of your conference tickets. If that's not enough, you can buy in Bitcoin. I don't get credit for it, so it kind of doesn't help me make my case to like keep my job. So if you really like me doing this, feel free to use code YTMAG and maybe I'll stick around post conference. Who knows? In the meantime, though, I'm going to hand it off to Casey for a new exclusive episode of Meet the Taco Plebs.
Guys, I am so excited to be back here for Meet the Plebs. We have an excellent guest today. He's actually been on Meet the Plebs before, and we had a great conversation then. And he's going to be doing something awesome for Bitcoin 2022. So it really ties into everything Bitcoin Magazine's doing these days. Welcome back on the show, Captain Sid.
Thanks, Casey. I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you. Lots to talk about today. I did say that you were on again or before, but could you just real quick go over, who you are, how you got into Bitcoin, real quick?
Yeah, well, by the name of the show, you could tell I am a pleb. But I got into Bitcoin. My rabbit hole journey kind of started a long time ago, just with economics classes in high school, and kind of noticing that things didn't really add up and didn't make sense, especially in the first and second class. Like the whole foundations didn't quite make sense to me and were too theoretical. So I kind of always had these reservations and went down different lines of thinking over the years in college and afterward. And it wasn't until I started looking into Bitcoin, which at first I was just interested in it as like a technology, as this like uncopyable digital thing. And as I started to find out about the economics that were being talked about around Bitcoin, then I really started to dive into the rabbit hole. I went full time into Bitcoin in 2018, quitting my job. I was working in marketing tech, and I went to work on a mining farm to fundraise for a mining farm. I got my crash course in how mining works and the economics of it and whatnot. Did that for a little while, started working at Kraken and worked there for about 3 years and left that role recently. And now I've turned full time again to writing just about Bitcoin, both for my own site and for Bitcoin Magazine. And yeah, now I am taking some time off of writing and doing this motorcycle trip, which I'm sure we'll talk about at some point, doing a Bitcoin tour around the US. So yeah, just been more and more involved in Bitcoin as the years go on.
I mean, excellent to have you working with us. And it's so cool that you're taking this break from writing to do this journey. Let's talk about it. Sid, if you wouldn't mind turning up your volume just a little bit so we can hear you better. We do want to hear about this awesome motorcycle ride and this like journey across America that you are describing.
Yeah, totally. Is this louder? Sorry.
Perfect.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this journey kind of started with a scale model of a Harley that I had sitting on my desk for the last year, and would always look at and think it would be interesting to have a bike that big and crazy and heavy and powerful. And as time went on, I've been living abroad and I wanted to come back to the US for a while. And I thought, it would be fun to do a motorcycle trip and to do something with Bitcoin. So I had been watching the rise of meetups and kind of the pleb culture, and a lot of that is happening in the US. And I thought now would be the perfect time to actually buy that touring bike and ride around the country and meet Bitcoiners, go to meetups. So it kind of snowballed from there, and I kept making it more and more of a serious thing. And now I actually just bought the bike 2 days ago and rode it back to where my cousin is staying in Florida 2 days ago or yesterday. So yeah, I've got the bike now and things are getting serious. So starting to plan out what the route is going to look like. It's going to start at Bitcoin 2022, and then I'm going to go from there out, stopping at Bitcoin meetups as I go and basically talking to Bitcoiners.
I mean, exciting. I've got a couple questions. First of all, I mean, are there any details you can share as far as what you're going to be doing at Bitcoin 2022? I know we may want to keep something secret. And also, I noticed that you have your description on Twitter is Knucklehead writing a across the country. Is the bike you've purchased a knucklehead? Can you talk at all about the bike that you've got?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the bike first. It's just top of mind. So I ended up buying a 2014 Electroglide Ultra Limited, which is just basically a giant kitted out couch on wheels. I went with a used bike just because the more I thought about it, a new bike to me just doesn't seem right. You don't need a new bike. I feel like a lot of my interest in Bitcoin that coincided with past interests is like we have such a strong consumer culture around the world where, you know, we always are buying new things. We always want new all the time. But if it still works and it still runs, why not get something, you know, older? So I went with a used bike. It still looks really good. It's obviously been cared for. And it's a huge, heavy, good touring bike for taking around. So it's all black right now, but I'm going to do some paint work on it and make some part orange and get some signatures on there and kind of turn it into a piece of art as I ride. So excited to do that. And then what was your first question about Bitcoin 2022, right?
Yeah, any plans for just how you're announcing your ride there? Or are you just gonna, you know, take the bike, show up and kind of do a burnout in front of everyone? Or
Yeah, I'm still talking to the team about the logistics of what might be announced and where. I do know, and I think I can talk about this. I'm working on putting together sort of a meetup of meetups at the conference for meetup organizers and people who regularly go to their local meetup to not only see the people from their city, but also meet other people who go to their meetups in other, you know, other cities around the country or around the world. So I'm really excited to be doing that, and I'll be able to release more details on what that's going to look like and when it's going to be pretty soon.
Oh, totally. I think that's an excellent idea, you know, spreading the power of meetups. And I guess that speaks a little bit to my next question, which is along the lines of what's the goal of this journey across America, you know, meeting all these plebs and doing this ride? What, you know, what's the most important thing to you to get out of this?
Yeah, so to me, what I really want to dive into and share are the stories of average people that are interested in Bitcoin and following it and investing in it. Because I think there's a plethora of content out there that's very good, rational explainers on why you need to have Bitcoin, whether that be from a privacy standpoint, security, economics, but they're from professionals in those fields, which is great and good for the rational side of the brain. But I think, as most people know over time, money and investments are not fully rational things. Like a lot of these things, we have a very strong emotional component to them. So what I want to get into is the stories of average people that look like you and me and billions of other people around the world, sharing why they are interested in Bitcoin, how they found it, not coming from, you know, an economics background or a technology background, because I think those stories will resonate much more with the millions of people that we want to understand what Bitcoin is and bust through the myths of, you know, the FUD myths around whatever it is, ESG or Ponzi schemes and whatnot. I want people to see that basically that people like me are also interested in Bitcoin. They're finding value in it, and for people to hear why that is, because I think those stories are really undertold, but they're very relatable.
Right. I think like the presentation of Bitcoin sometimes comes off as like this giant nowadays, you know, especially as adoption has really taken off. It comes off as like a giant institutional financial type of thing where you have to have a lot of money to invest, or it's complicated, or it's technology related. And I think this harkens back to like why people really enjoy Bitcoin is it's usable by everyone. It's like for everyone. And yeah, I think that's like for lack of a better term, a great like blue collar return to like, you know, people can relate to that story. So, I mean, I think that's an excellent idea. Besides the, you know, launching the motorcycle there and taken off on your journey. Is there anything else about Bitcoin 2022 that you're specifically excited? You also mentioned that that meetup, of course.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to just see people in the Bitcoin space that I haven't seen in a really long time. A lot of friends that I've been keeping up with online. I think we do a great job of sharing content with each other and chatting on Telegram and whatnot. But for context, I've been out of the country since before COVID started, and I'm originally American. So my friends and family are all back here, and I haven't seen them in 2 years, including a lot of people that I met through Bitcoin. And a lot of them are going to be at Bitcoin 2022. So I'm really excited to just reconnect with those people.
No, 100%. The Bitcoin community lives online. It lives on Bitcoin Twitter mostly, but there's something to be said that's irreplaceable about like meeting up with like-minded people in person. I mean, since before the COVID pandemic, it seems like a lifetime ago. So we will gladly welcome you back into the United States with this wonderful event. So, I mean, pivoting here, you're doing this great journey and such, but really you're one of our favorite writers here at the magazine. Produce some of the best content we have, stuff that people read and it's actionable. Specifically, the latest stuff you've done on home mining. Can you just talk about what's important about home mining in regards to the network and why you've been writing about it?
Yeah, so I think home mining is another kind of undertold story. Mining, back to when I worked on it in 2018, has been something I've always been really personally interested in. To me, it's like one of the bedrocks of the whole network. If mining isn't working, then Bitcoin doesn't exist, full stop. So I've always been really interested in it. And home mining, I kind of wrote off in 2018 because I thought the economics would never work out for the price that people pay for power residentially, plus the taxes and tariffs and whatever that get added on, whereas a big industrial miner can negotiate for lower rates. So I just thought, this is going to disappear. And then it was kind of last year on Twitter, I started seeing these random names pop up that I'd never seen before of people doing really cool stuff with home mining, reusing the heat and improving the economics of the machines. And I thought, this is something that, I'm seeing these people don't have that many followers, they're not getting that much engagement, but the stuff they're posting is super, super helpful. And I want to shine more light on what they're doing. So given that I can write for Bitcoin Magazine, I thought I want to start talking to these people and getting the full story, because a lot of the stuff that I was seeing out there is just tweets here and there. And some people are really good at making really informative Twitter threads, but other times I see a tweet and I think I have a million questions about what's going on, like in this picture or in this story. So I thought a long form interview articles would be a good way to dig that out and just keep showing people how this works, how you can make home mining work for you by reusing the heat and immersing machines and whatnot, and do some really cool stuff with it that, to your point about decentralization, can help decentralize mining further. Because if individual home miners are all using this to run their water heater, that's a lot harder to shut down than one giant 100-megawatt farm.
Right. Let's dig into that a little bit about some of like these benefits and use cases. There's heating, that's the most obvious one, but can you speak about some of those things that people can really tangibly see as a result of their Bitcoin mining, besides from the obvious Bitcoin they earn?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for me was understanding heat reuse. So it's my understanding that as far as computers and electrical components go, you get the same heat from the same amount of watts, no matter what that heater is doing. So that heater could be a coil in a space heater, or it could be an ASIC. And obviously an ASIC is much more difficult to produce. It's more expensive from a capital perspective, but once you turn it on, a 1,000-watt ASIC is going to produce basically the same amount of heat as a 1,000-watt space heater. So why not mine Bitcoin with that heat essentially and reuse that heat? So I've started to flip my thinking from mining and then doing something with the heat or getting rid of the heat, to you're creating heat and then you're getting Bitcoin out of it, essentially. That's kind of what you're doing. Now, it doesn't really replace a natural gas furnace, which is what a lot of homes use. But if you're all electric anyway, this is a really great way to make money back on your heating bill, basically, and reduce your heating bill. So you can think of it as just reducing your heating bill, or you can think of it as mining and reusing that heat. But I think it just kind of opens up the number of customers that would be willing to use this type of system when you think it's a heater that pays you rather than an ASIC that dumps out heat you could use. But as far as the heat, like I've also learned there's lots of ways you can use that heat. So obviously you could use one as a space heater, which I've seen many times, where the ASIC is just blowing hot air through it and that hot air is coming out and heating a room. But like Coin Heated, for example, on Twitter, is an amazing home miner that I interviewed. He's been doing this immersion tank setup, and he has lots of ideas around how you can basically heat water with an immersion tank and then pump that water into all sorts of different systems. So you can use that water in a water-to-water heat exchanger to heat up water. You can use it in an HVAC system to heat up air. You can use it to heat floors, to heat a driveway. He uses it to heat a pool, or rather, given his scale, the pool cools down his miners because he needs to off so much heat that he's dumping it into a pool now. But he has lots of really inventive ways for using this. And actually HVAC companies are used to doing this with water, but instead of heating the water with electricity or natural gas, you could heat it with ASICs.
Definitely. I think like the coolest part about it is the water style applications, right? Like thinking about Bitcoin mining in terms of just heating your home with the air that it produces is the first step, but like there's so many cool things I think we haven't even really discovered yet that we could do with this stuff. So you did mention though that your first reservation was the capital start, and that there is a capital, cost to home mining. Can you talk about, how it does appear to be rather expensive to start home mining, some things people can do to like potentially mitigate that if it is, avoidable at all, and maybe some other obstacles and barriers that people might encounter when trying to do this?
Yeah, so as far as the capital cost, right now, it doesn't seem like there's a really good way to reduce that capital cost. Like companies just sell ASICs straight up and you have to pay in cash. I think down the line, this will become more commercialized, hopefully, where there's like leasing programs, and like I was saying, with a heater that produces Bitcoin, you could maybe just lease a heater from a company and it would pay you back some amount or give you some discount or heating bill or give you some Bitcoin. But I haven't seen any of those companies yet. But as far as the operating cost, heat reuse, which I just talked about, is the biggest way to kind of cut down your costs. But power agreements are also another one that depends on your state, your location, and what kind of programs they offer. But a lot of power companies offer different agreements. One of them would be like a kind of a discount for drawing a constant amount of power. So basically the problem for a power company and for a grid authority is they have to match demand and supply in real time. So when people come home and turn their TVs on, they have to ramp up supply to match that. And when everyone turns their lights off, they have to dump supply to match that in real time. So, or else they'll cause problems with the grid and shorts and whatnot. So they have to make sure that they're producing level with what people are demanding. And as far as you could make it easier for them to know what they're going to need to produce ahead of time, they'll give you some discount. So one way is this constant load. Like if your house can pull a constant load all the time, they might give you a discount for that. Some states will give you a discount. That's one way. There's also like demand response programs. So a lot of like hotter states in the summer, they will give you like a smart plug or have some system where they can shut off your AC and other really high use appliances for like a few hours during peak times in the summer when everyone has their AC on full blast. But in return for not having AC at that critical moment when it's really hot out, they give you a much cheaper rate all the rest of the year. So I talked to one miner, I think his handle is Miner for Heat, and he basically has this program. And so he essentially, on days that he knows are going to be really hot, he will pre-cool the house in the morning. And then sometimes in the afternoon, his AC will get shut off. But as long as they keep doors and windows closed, it's not really hot inside. It may be a little bit hotter than other people's houses, but it's all right. And in return, he saves like 40% on his electricity rate the rest of the time around the year. So he's able to get a much better rate for his ASICs.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of that sort of exchange before. I am curious. You mentioned like what it sounds like you were mentioning was basically the described duck curve. Would that be correct to say? If you've heard of that.
The duck curve rings the bell, but I can't remember exactly what it is off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's Mark Goodwin wrote a piece about it. It was basically like the peak demand. It had to do with the peak demand hours and the actual energy produced in California not coinciding, essentially. And
right.
And he described basically how the Bitcoin miners could help alleviate that issue, which is it's interesting that Bitcoin miners, who you think, people tend to think of them as like absorbing energy off the grid as if like there's a limited amount, when really they can be useful to these companies and offer them, they'll get offered discounted rates due to the nature of what they're doing.
Yeah. So the duck curve, that is part of that constant load conversation. It's exactly what I'm talking about. I remember talking, I think it was CoinHeated who I was talking to about this. And he was saying like the agreement that he has with the power company, it requires you to draw like basically industrial levels of power and then have the ability to turn off that load within some insane time. It was like 1 minute, maybe 5 minutes or something. You have to go from like multiple megawatts to zero kind of really fast. And there's like a floor, like you have to have at least 500 kilowatts or something. I don't remember exactly what the floor is, but you have to have that amount. And then over that, they'll have a conversation with you about a discount if you can flip off all of that consumption really fast. And then they basically will call up these people and say, hey, we need you to shut off all your stuff right now. And it's kind of like the AC thing, but on a much larger scale. And they give you bigger discounts. And it's more for like industrial facilities, factories and whatnot. But those factories, they can't turn on and off that quickly. Whereas ASICs, it takes 10 seconds to spin down a whole farm of ASICs. It's much easier to respond to fluctuations in that curve and help the grid.
Right. Yeah. I guess Bitcoin's in sort of a unique position where it's not an entire factory that needs to be shut down per se.
Yeah.
I do have a question in just branching further off of like obstacles. There's a lot of talk right now that if mining becomes too centralized via large farms, basically taking too much of the hash rate, regulation could be introduced that would sort of dictate what blocks would be allowed per se. Do you think that that's possible? Do you see that, Bitcoin miners at home are like the remedy to that? Or do you sort of write that off as probably not even being a chance of happening?
I mean, I'm by no means even an amateur on regulation, so I can't really say whether that would actually happen, but it sounds plausible to me. And I think the more we can do to move mining and nodes and every part of the network out to the edges where there are individuals in control of it rather than large organizations, the stronger Bitcoin is going to be, because it's the more people that even not need to get convinced, but need to get organized to even turn against a certain party or censor transactions or whatnot.
No, definitely. I'm in agreement with you there. So do you see like a trend towards an increase in home miners over time, or do you think that as more and more hash rate enters the market, it'll just become more difficult for home miners to be viable?
I see it increasing a lot. I think there will be some commercialization within the home mining space, like I was saying, with heaters that produce sats. And hopefully those types of units, like we've been talking about the S9 still, what, 8 years, no, 6 years or something, 6 or 8 years since it was created, and it's still out there in large numbers hashing away. So I think we're going to have a situation where hopefully power costs keep coming down as there's more and more innovation and discovery around energy sources and pushing energy prices down further. And then home miners will have the edge over industrial miners in that they can use that heat. And I think it will be much harder. Industrial miners will certainly come up with ways to use the heat, but I think it will be much more difficult for them to put together large amounts of capital and build out a whole farm and reuse that heat. Whereas for a home, they're a little less price sensitive. They can just have they can just replace their electric heater and have a little ASIC in there. And it doesn't necessarily need to be the newest ASIC because they can, they're cutting down on their power cost rather than trying to make a profit and justify that profit.
Yeah, it's actually funny. The lasting quality of the hardware used in Bitcoin mining sort of speaks back to what you were describing earlier about like lessening consumerism. Maybe it could be said it's related to a lower time preference or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly interesting that they're designed to last so long, and they really are lasting very long times. Mm-hmm. Here's an interesting question. If you had the capital right now to purchase a whole coin or spend the same amount on ASICs, however many you could purchase with that, what would your choice be and why?
Yeah, it's a conditional, because my issue, I would have bought miners probably last year or the year before if I had a good place to plug them in. But I unfortunately only really have access to electricity in California. And that's one of very few places even right now that you can't mine profitably. If I had access to like under 10 cents a kilowatt hour, then I would probably go the mining route. Otherwise I would get the coins. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in mining. It's just figuring out, what facility do I host it in, or where do I plug it in where I can work on it.
Yeah, definitely a good answer. Let's dig into that just a little bit. You mentioned California being one of the very few places where Bitcoin mining isn't profitable. Obviously energy costs are vary from state to state. Can you talk about how that might, it's difficult for people who are in California to do anything about that. Do you see any progression towards, Bitcoin mining being available for more people regardless of that?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to regulation in a lot of states. Like, that's my understanding of why it's so high in California. There's a lot of regulation and taxes and whatnot around electricity generation. Whereas like Texas, for instance, has a free energy market, which apparently is pretty rare. I don't know a lot about each individual state. I've only talked to certain home miners about what they know about, their individual state. Although what I do think will start to have an impact, hopefully, is like more home generation systems, like people able to put solar panels on their roofs or wind turbines or whatever, and produce energy on their own. I think that will start to lead more people to turn ASICs on and start to use some of that excess energy when they have excess energy. So for instance, I have a friend that lives off grid in the jungle in Thailand, and he has a panel on his roof that makes 1.5 kilowatts. And he said he usually uses like max peak power, he'll use 2 or like 20 or 30% of that. So there's a lot of extra energy that's going into a battery pack, and then that battery pack is just sitting there, and he's not really drawing much except for a computer and maybe charging a cell phone and an internet router. So I told him you should put a box in the back and put an S9 in there because it's free power for you. Like he doesn't pay anything for that. He's paid off the panels. So he could easily be mining. And again, he doesn't need an S19 because he's not paying, power rates and having to be profitable on top of that. It's free power. So he may as well be using it.
Literally. You might have like a unique perspective here since you've talked to so many miners. Do you see off-grid mining and like, sustainable sources like that being the dominant source for home mining as we go forward?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think it all depends on how energy markets develop as well. It's going to come down to need. I think people who have a desire or a need to put, say, solar panels on the roof and then end up having extra energy, they might come upon this as a solution basically for doing something with that extra energy instead of just letting it sit. I think it'll just be down to need. Whereas if the grid starts pumping out 5-cent kilowatt or 2-cent kilowatt hour electricity to tons of people, then they're probably not going to go that route and have, a need for their own electricity generation.
So it sounds like from like the totality of this conversation, a lot of, specifically to home mining, but mining in general is a very much conditional thing that relies on a lot of external factors like the cost of energy and how that energy is being produced, and then the regulation down the line from that energy. It sounds like that plays into pretty much every decision that miners would be making.
Yeah, I mean, energy is your cost. That's pretty much it. I mean, you have to clean the machines. Maybe you could talk about that as being a cost, and you have to cool them, but cooling then comes down to energy mostly. The thing I love about mining so much is I remember day one of economics class, and we talked about perfect competition, which is another thing that doesn't really exist. It's just theoretical. But one of the examples that we were given is like restaurants are almost perfectly competitive. They're very, very difficult. It's very difficult to run a restaurant. You have very thin margins. But of course, restaurants are highly differentiated. Each restaurant has their own little thing that they do special to them, their own brand and whatnot, and their own customer loyalty. Bitcoin has none of that. There are machines that are plugged in to the wall and connected to the same network, and the network does not care whether you have a newer or older machine or where you're based or what your political views are. They just want you to submit hashes, and if you win, then you win. There's really no advantage that you can get other than power cost.
Not unique, Captain Sid says. But no, I mean, looking back at the last time you were here on Meet the Plebs, you mentioned two things that you were looking forward to in Bitcoin adoption. Nation state adoption specifically, and the implementation of mining by energy producers. Could you just reflect on, I think this was, sorry, one sec. This was October. Can you reflect on any development in that space so far, and what we're looking at now?
Yeah, so it's been pretty wild to watch everything that's happened, not really from a nation state adoption perspective, but from nation states being involved, like Canada weaponizing their financial system against their citizens, obviously the Ukrainian invasion and people trying to get out, trying to move money around, and then Russians as well dealing with the weaponization of the financial system against them. So there's been a lot of moves by nation states that have highlighted the use of Bitcoin and the value of Bitcoin to regular people that 2 years ago was not clear at all. It was still just an investment, but now people are seeing the censorship resistance, the mobility that's granted by Bitcoin, and just how useful and powerful that might be, even in like a Western democracy like Canada that you would think would protect these types of rights for their citizens at all costs. So that's been pretty wild to watch. And then what was the second thing? Sorry.
It was the implementation of mining by energy producers.
Oh, yeah. So I haven't really followed this all that closely. I think home mining sort of supplanted my interest in that. But I think we're going to see more of that. Like after that Texas winter storm, we started seeing more talk of we can use Bitcoin miners to balance the grid. So hopefully that is starting to enter higher levels of conversation among people who are not typically following Bitcoin.
Definitely. I mean, you mentioned all of the geopolitical events taking place today. We could really have a whole nother podcast on that, but real quick, could you just speak to how Bitcoin mining plays into that, maybe even specifically home mining?
Yeah, so you mean about Russia and Ukraine or
yeah, well, and just all around, especially with Ukraine and Russia being large energy producers, how are miners going to react to this, and then how does like geopolitical strife like that play into people's decisions on where they plan on mining? Because 7 or 8 months ago, Ukraine wouldn't have necessarily been seen as a terrible place to be mining.
Yeah. So that's a really good point. One other thing about home mining that I started to discover as I was talking to some miners and just digging in more to it, and Econo Alchemist is a really good person to follow about this, is the fact that you're acquiring no KYC Bitcoin. I think all these events are really highlighting, they're definitely highlighting for me personally how useful that could be to have some amount of no KYC Bitcoin or have your whole stack in that. And home mining, especially if you're reusing heat, you're basically getting, depending on your power cost, a slight discount on Bitcoin. You might overpay occasionally, but if you think about it as dollar cost averaging rather than trying to make a profit, again, you don't mind if you're losing a little bit of money here and there because you're gaining the fact that there's no trail to those coins. So that is a really useful aspect that I hope is becoming more apparent to people as they're watching invasions and chaos and financial censorship. And also no counterparty risk as well. If you're going to do home mining, like you said, Ukraine would have been a really good place to be mining up until a couple of weeks ago. And if you're mining at home, you have much bigger problems if that miner is at risk.
Oh, definitely. Like I said, there's a full rabbit hole we could dive down with the geopolitical events going on right now. But I think, like you said, they really do highlight the sort of reason why the KYC premium is often paid. It might seem like, why would you do that now? But when you need it, that's when the premium is worth it. So, wrapping up here, you've got the motorcycle ride, you've got the home mining, you've got the Bitcoin 2022 going on. What are you most looking forward to in the Bitcoin space as we head into the rest of 2022?
Yeah, so I would say two things. One is on the home mining front, just more commercialization of home mining equipment. I've been following a lot of tinkering and really cool stuff being made by just individual homeowners and miners that are building custom solutions. But like CoinHeated, for example, is now commercializing his really cool immersion tank setup. You don't have to take the fans off. You just slide the ASIC right in. It's super easy. And then that would go to a water heat exchanger. So things like that are going to make it really easy for the next wave of home miners who maybe don't want to do like metalworking and build their own boxes and aren't into that level of tinkering. They can buy something like CoinHeated solution and then have that taken care of for them. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more and more products like that hit the market. And then the second thing to tie in with all the geopolitical stuff is just the development and spreading of more privacy-centric tools, things like join markets and CoinJoin and Samurai and whatnot to mix coins, to acquire non-KYC coins. I think there's a lot of that stuff out there. It's very technical to try and get into. So I'm looking forward to both more tools, but also just better explanations around how to use it, why to use it. And I think the motivation is now there for a lot of people to pick these things up and start to learn more.
Awesome. Totally in agreement with you there. Commercialization of home mining will be an excellent thing to watch, and the spread of privacy. Right. Just published an article yesterday about how important it is to keep that in mind while we develop on Bitcoin. So, I mean, it's been an excellent conversation with you, Captain Sid. I want to remind everyone that if they want to see Captain Sid's awesome electric glide, they've got to go to Bitcoin Miami, April 6th to the 9th. Use the code YTMAG, get your percentage off, and come check out this bike, man. I'm going to be super excited to see it in person and launch this journey. But thanks for joining me, Captain Sid.
Thanks, really appreciate it. Looking forward to hitting the conference.
Yes. Again, get those conference tickets, everyone. We're going to take a quick break here, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back, Day, and thank you for sticking around. We are entering the final hour of today's episode, and we are joined by, you know what it is, you know what time it is. It's time for the breakup. Nolan, how are we doing?
I love life. We can't complain. Beautiful day. And I'm actually going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects in the entire planet today. So it's extra special. It's extra special. I feel winning and victory and World War III ending today. I feel it today in particular, because South Korea, a place that I spent a lot of time in my life, had an election yesterday. They might have exited the clown world. They might have exited the clown world. They might be in a brand new clown world. We're not exactly sure. No one knows anything anymore. The world is crazy. We're not going to be talking about Ukraine and Russia today, because what else is there to say? Who knows what's going on there still? So today we're going to be focused on a completely different part of the world, but I think with some really positive news for Bitcoiners. So on this show, we try to compare the fiat world with the Bitcoin world, the fiat standard with the Bitcoin standard, fiat institutions with burgeoning Bitcoin institutions. And the election that we saw yesterday in Korea actually pitted crypto against fiat institutions as one of the main election topics. Crypto itself was inside most of the debates, generational debates, wealth transfer debates, the demographic debates, and we're going to get into each of those things. Now, let me just, I guess, first say Yoon Suk Yeol is the winner. He became the new prime minister, and brand new party. This party came out of nowhere, and the people in the party themselves didn't come out of nowhere, but there's a bunch of pieces to it that really, I think, maybe signal some big things for Bitcoin, for America, for everything we're seeing right now. So first, let me just give you a bit of a background on my own personal experience in Korea, just so you know where I'm coming from, and maybe understand that I do have a bit of analysis or a bit of insight on what's going on in Korea. So I lived there as an English teacher between my undergrad and law school, and got to learn the language a little bit. I can read and write. That's Yoon Suk Yeol. I can get around. It's not great. I probably have 200 words vocabulary. I can order food. Banchan mane juseyo. That's give me a lot of the nice little side dishes that you get at the Korean restaurants, right? You say that when you get into the restaurant. Give me a lot of those beautiful, delicious dishes. We're going to talk about the manners in a second, because it's a big part of actually what's going on in Korea. A country like Korea, and we're going to talk about it here in this tradition versus modernism, kind of scaled really quickly as a country. They became urban, and Seoul grew out of nothing within 10, 20 years after the Korean War. And the language itself, the Korean language itself, is a little onerous when you're speaking with older people or people you know or friends and all these kinds of things. The articles that you would put in them, like in English, we have Mr., Miss, Mrs., you know, it's pretty simple. In their language, they've got a lot more of these things, and they actually end up changing the entire sentence, a lot like a verb would in English. You know, I will go there, I went there. The verb is really the dynamic piece. Often in the Korean language, who you're speaking to can affect how the sentence is structured. So all that to say, it's not that easy to scale friendships and relationships from a country setting where you can take more time into the modern world. And it was one of the reasons why Seoul itself was not a very polite place over the years when I was there, in the sense that people were a bit like New York City. No one cared. You'd get cut off. They'd run around. No one spoke to people, kind of rude stuff. But that's just because this whole, at least that was my theory having been there, that this entire onerous, difficult language piece, you know, like when a young person smokes a cigarette with an older person at a bar there, for example, the young person will actually hide their inhales like this, just to be like, I know I'm young and I should be working to support you who did so much in your life to make the country great. I shouldn't really be taking this minute off. I should hide myself. You know, you're definitely allowed to sit there and drink, but it's just sort of a way to show respect and all that stuff. When someone hands you change, they'll touch their arm in a position that indicates your social status. Very Confucian. They say it's the most Confucian country left in the world. And that just doesn't scale into an urban environment. So that has a lot to do with some of the tensions that were there. So I stayed in Korea between my undergrad and law school. I went back after I graduated from law school and worked as a lawyer there, and stayed in all kinds of really neat areas and in the city of Seoul, and got to know the place really well. Years later, when I was working with CoinDesk when it first came to America, I helped set up the Korean version of CoinDesk, CoinDesk Korea, and found the partner, which is called Hankyoreh, which was a news site that's a little bit like The Economist, you know, sort of like a soft center left, but not extreme. It seemed like a good partner at the time, and I ended up using them. Oh, what's going on?
Will you shift your camera just for a brief second? A little bit more? A little bit more. No. Yep, perfect. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
No, so these, so what was I saying about Korea? 1 second. It was about changing, going from law school. It's okay. It was about going from law, you know, I went to law school, and then I came, worked there, got to know some really neat people.
You started Korean CoinDesk.
Korean CoinDesk, yeah, sorry, I was a little ahead, yeah. Started Korean CoinDesk. So I used Hankyoreh, which is kind of like The Economist, and it's still a very successful news operation and going really well. So let's talk about Yoon Suk Yeol and why this is really different and what's going on over there. So first of all, it looked like the two candidates. So it's that crypto was an agreed upon center in this election. Both candidates, their left-wing candidate and their right-wing candidate, both agreed that legacy financial system wasn't working for Korea. Korea has tremendous credit card debt, tremendous personal debt. People are really leveraged hard there. It's been a Cantillon nightmare there for some people, because this country has actively, when I lived there, I've mentioned on this show before, I got to understand FX markets a lot in that decade because I was earning their local money, and everybody in the country knew it was devalued. Trump, in his campaign, threatened to make Korea a currency manipulator in the world scene, which would, you know, have all kinds of implications for how they extended credit abroad and all these kinds of things. So Korea has been a major buyer of American T-bills debt for a long time in order to maintain its trade imbalance in the United States and continue to sell all those Hyundais. Weirdly, when I grew up in Quebec, Hyundai, this is another amazing connection that I've had with this country. Hyundai built cars in Canada when I was a child, and weirdly, my whole village on the border of Vermont and Quebec just got filled with Korean kids when I was a little kid. And weirdly, also, they got exempt from the language laws. They shouldn't have even been allowed to go to school with me because I was at an English school, but they were allowed. So I had a ton of these Korean friends as a kid. And it happened in the same year that Canada hosted the Olympics and Korea hosted the Olympics. So I had this sort of strange, like Canada, Korea, everything in the world, everyone talking about it. All of a sudden my town is filled with Korean. So I sort of never forgot about it. That's why it was easy for me to move there years later. So this sort of goes way back to childhood and then continued straight up until I was a professional setting up CoinDesk career there. And I went back sort of every year in the past years until COVID, check in on the business, see what's going on, meet people, check out the Bitcoin scene over there and talk about stuff. So back to this currency manipulation thing. Trump threatened to do it. They've been dealing with local capital controls for a long time. There is like a $50,000 limit. I think it's around that. It was $50,000 US when I was there per year that they were allowed to exit. They had trouble paying tuition when they would come to school in America because usually American tuitions are a little higher than their capital controls allow them. So they have these, they're allowed to do it. So everyone got used to this FX hedging. But this is the interesting part, is they are so used to FX hedging, they're so used to this debate that what I saw between the left and the right that both agreed crypto versus the legacy system internally had the debates that we would recognize in crypto versus Bitcoin, where this fellow, the conservative guy, did see Bitcoin as separate from the rest of the market and had a bit more attention on it. Now, I'm not going to say he's a Bitcoiner. I'm not going to paint a picture that it's exactly like what someone from Bitcoin Magazine would have wanted to see, but there was definitely an appreciation for the macro aspect versus the more left-wing party that I would say was really interested in the creative economy side, really interested in the social incentivization sort of side. So a little more on the games and training people to do things side. So, teach their own. I don't think the left, it was a very tight election too. So I also don't want to paint a picture that this guy wiped him out or anything. Very tight, but it looks like as far as Bitcoiners are concerned, it sort of went the Bitcoiner way with this guy. He's a big libertarian, and this is where it gets funny. He cites Milton Friedman all the time, won't take a conservative label or a populist label, but he promised to get rid of the minimum wage. So they're not going to have a minimum wage anymore. He's going to get rid of any food safety standards using a Milton Friedman argument that poor people should have the choice to eat, or cheap food if they want. His argument being that the market will supply answers, and that already, if you know Korea, you'll see that there's tremendous competition for street food, and no idiot would eat at a dirty Korean street food place anyway, because there's so many good ones. Why would you go to the dirty one with no people when you can go to the nice one with a lot of people? I never checked a license in my whole life, and I lived off of street food in Korea. So maybe it made a difference. I don't know. My bet is not. And he's now going to at least explore Korean street food without any licensing and all this stuff. And my prediction right there is you're going to see a proliferation of a new business model around food. Korea already has that model where they'll deliver real dishes to your house for takeout. They're way ahead of Uber and all that stuff, Uber Eats that we would use in America. They bring the actual hot dishes for sushi and for whatever, and they come back and pick them up at night. So they're going to be able to add a whole new, maybe selling out of individual kitchens and stuff like that. So, and it looks like young men in particular moved to the party. So brand new party, People's Power Party. Of 20-year-old males, they got 55.3% of the vote versus 34.1%. So we see this turn now where the boomer generation and the older generation are the liberals, and the younger males in particular, females were sort of split, but definitely not one-sided as you might imagine it to be in America or Europe. The males went heavily towards this conservative option or libertarian option. Males in their 30s, even more so. It was 56%, and a little more for the left-wing guys. This one's going to sound unbelievable to most Americans. So they're going to abolish the Ministry of Women and Gender Equality. And he ran on a campaign in response to Me Too of me first. That's what they went with, me first. I can't think of a more incendiary thing. I mean, I can't think of a more incendiary response to Me Too. Now, look, I've seen a lot of what Westerners would describe as absolutely horrific. Horrific would be strong. Westerners have seen gender imbalance there that insults them. I've seen some stuff there too that I'm definitely not okay with. And I've seen in particular violence against women firsthand. There's even a culture of paying for a lot of sexual experiences, let's say. And that is something that really was uncomfortable for me as a young guy there. But I learned to not really compare their lifestyle with my own. I grew up in a Canadian high school, and basically all I did in high school was learn how to talk to girls. I mean, that's all we did. I don't think we did anything else. I didn't study. No one did. Who did that, right? You learned how to interact with people of the other gender, with your own friends. There's not a lot of pressure. No people in our generation, and this is what I realized when I was there, that no people in our generation are, there are some, but it's not a standard thing where we've got to take care of our parents. There's no young man who, you know, like me, didn't really have to take high school seriously, doesn't have the pressure of taking care of my parents. There's no social safety net for social security for retired people in Korea. It's not like it is in America. So that generation had to be taken care of by the young generation. So when these young males would do that, and I always looked down on it and said, it is terrible. I'm not saying any of this stuff is good, but I did learn to not judge them by my own standards and say, well, look, they have a totally different life than me, and it's not the same thing. Now, I don't think, I'm going to mind read this new leader. I don't think he actually is against any form of gender equality in the sense that you know, Me Too is trying to stop crimes. This guy is a prosecutor. I'm going to say that it was more about getting the reaction. It's like that whole thing where you're asked in a political campaign, when are you going to stop beating your dog? But why does this guy, you know, why does he have to answer in the affirmative or negative to a question that isn't really about that? He's concerned about the birth rate in Korea, and I think a lot of people are. Korea has a terrible birth rate, so that's really what the question was about: this birth rate, gender balance, working women, not working women. How many ways are there to increase the birth rate? So, in his mind, he had really, I think, existential problems with the country and its future, and didn't want to get bogged down in some of the gender politics. You can say it's right or wrong, and maybe they might need more debate around this stuff. What he's saying is, forget it, we're not doing that. We have more immediate things to solve. So that's what happened. And it's a big change. I mean, if you're running on a campaign of me first versus me too, you're seeing that there's a major change in dialogue and the way this stuff is being debated. And if you compare that even to America now, we've got that omnibus bill that came with a $1.5 trillion just 2 nights ago, barely read, but skimming through it, Oilfield Rando pointed out that it's got $200 million for gender equity and the Equity Action Fund. So they're going to give money to investors to do gender equity stuff as a fund. They've got $50 million to the Women's Leadership Fund. So I guess if they find 50 women leaders, do they pay them $1 million to be leaders? What's going on? What's the $50 million for? How many people do they have to pay to be leaders? It's a lot of money. So, and no one's ever going to debate about it. So when I see this debate that we can see in Korea, they've clearly got a Bitcoin versus fiat debate. They've got a young and old debate generationally, but it's kind of flipped around. It's not the conservative is old, the liberals are young. They flipped it already. It already did the flip. And then the young people are actually the traditionalists. So I lived in a neighborhood in South Korea for a little while called Jongno Samga. It's a very traditional neighborhood, little streets, and just a gorgeous place. I went there first time when I was a teacher. This would have been around the World Cup time, 2002. And it was, you know, really busy, urban. A lot of the old traditional stuff was being overwhelmed by hastily built stuff from the 1960s and 70s. I went back in 2008 when I was working as a young articling lawyer, and they had finally done one of their first public renovation projects to reestablish what had been a natural creek there in that whole area for hundreds of years. And they rebuilt it, and they had poured concrete and filled it. They filled the creek with concrete because it was expedient to put roads in and all that stuff. And there was this ditch with a beautiful creek running under it that was traditionally one of the reasons why they had the city there in the first place. And now they had redone it, and they made this creek gorgeous. They've redone a lot of that neighborhood now, and you keep seeing all these different changes that they've done, and you see a country that quickly lost its traditional aspects by modernizing so quickly, but they still have a generation that remembered the traditional pieces. And now it looks like there's a revival movement amongst the young people to re-embrace the traditional things they've only heard about that were gone. And it looks like they're going for it. And even when you look at the way they did the election, some of the neat things that came out of it, they resurrected dead presidents. I mean, just think about it. We're talking about merging traditional cultures with modern stuff and this appetite for the things you didn't know about. They actually resurrected dead leaders using deepfake and AI. And they would interview in like a sports thing, like a telecast. They recreated old leaders, and television commentators would interview the old leaders. Like imagine we had like an AI of JFK. And JFK was like, well, what do you think about Trump? You know, and he's like, well, you know, he does this and I wouldn't do that. And they had this stuff. That's what they did in their election. And it, you know, first note on that, it reminds me that in this day and age, if you see a video and you're arguing and you're saying, oh, I saw the video myself, it's true. No, stop. You saw a video doesn't mean anything anymore. So get that out of your head. If we're going to talk about breakup on this show, breakup with the idea that seeing a video means you saw something that happened for real. It did not happen. It didn't. It's just a video. It's a cartoon. They're all cartoons now. You can't tell the difference between a cartoon and reality. I can't tell the difference when I saw this guy. They resurrected dead presidents and they gave live interviews to real questions. And they sounded coherent. They really did. And what the whole picture kind of reminds me of, we've got all this crazy stuff in their election. Here on our end, we've got Dan Held reminding us that world reserve currencies are being challenged. We're at 20-year inflation highs. We've got huge BTC awareness, war and pandemic eroding trust in institutions. Another fella, Garrick Morin, tells us Canada freezing bank accounts, USA freezing international reserves, the London Mercantile Exchange canceling trades that hurts brokers. Things are moving fast and the rule of law is breaking down in the financial system. It's not good. When I look at these two things, this dynamic, now, I don't want to paint a picture of the Korean election like everyone's happy about it. Everyone in that country believes it was their version of the Trump-Hillary thing. Like, you know, families broken apart, people fighting, people hating each other, really tense, really awful, everyone calling each other names. And then I look at the chaos that the legal system in America is in. And I look at the situation Korea finds itself in. They've already, let's say, strangled a bit of their crypto industry by going too hard on some regulations in the past couple of years. They've reduced the number of exchanges to very few compared to proliferation before. And I see the way they're maybe getting through some stuff and making a turn and changing. Some things negative, some things positive. But it reminds me of hybrid flowers a little bit. It reminds me of something I heard once about Ichiro Suzuki, the Japanese baseball player. Ichiro Suzuki played baseball the way baseball was played, the Shoeless Joe Jackson way, the Wee Willie Keeler way, the 1910s and 20s way, before Babe Ruth played baseball, before the home run, when it was all base stealing and small ball. That was the baseball that was actually exported for the first time to Japan. That was brought to Japan and was played there. This hat that I'm wearing here is actually an American all-star team from 1922 that traveled to Japan to play, and Babe Ruth was on the team and all these guys were on the team. And they went over there and they made baseball the biggest thing. And when Ichiro Suzuki played baseball in the 1990s and 2000s in America, this was in the era of the home run, the steroids, the Mark McGwire, the Sammy Sosa, and all these guys. And all of a sudden, this skinny kid came out, stealing bases, slapping the ball this way, slapping the ball that way, infield hits, all this old style baseball. And it reminded everyone of this beautiful game, the way it was played almost 100 years earlier and exported to Japan. So this is the hybrid flower theory. And you see it in colonial activity, colonial history quite a bit, where countries that took on qualities of the other country end up becoming more accentuated. They become more dramatic. And in a lot of ways, Korea is a super America. It's more American than America at times, a little bit like Japan can be with baseball. Both of these places have their own culture. So I don't want to make it sound like they absorbed all of American culture. But it was American imperialism kind of at its best. It's like, you know, have the merchant in charge, have the rule of law, have good markets. You know, you're on your own, wear your own clothes, do whatever you want. We don't care. You're just going to have this constitution that makes sure the rule of law and the merchant is in charge. Whatever else happens, you're on your own. And in the end, we see that there are systems based entirely on American systems from the end of World War II. And in some ways, Korea is sort of the very end of World War II / beginning of the Cold War. And in some ways, it's coming right around full circle. We see Korea becoming one of the most amazing democracies on earth now. I mean, that was an amazing election to have gotten through, to witness and to see what happens. I was there for the election in 2002 when a local guy, No Moon-yeon, when I was staying in this town called Busan, was elected. I was there again when I was on that time as a lawyer in 2008, and he killed himself when I was in town. The simulation delivered me into a strange circumstance. He was elected in 2002 when I was there, the biggest news in the country, biggest, local boy, hero, poor kid, lawyer, super liberal. He was like, you know, all the dreams that Obama got caught up in America. It was kind of similar, right? Homogenous ethnically for that country, but he was from like sort of a poor background, worked really hard and made it. But corruption, all that other stuff. And by the time I went back, it was over. And I mean, literally the day I came back, I hadn't been there in years. And I came back and the front page news, he was gone. And so now we see that they have this tense election, and it looks like they've gotten over some of these problems. It looks like they've matured. They've matured from the state they were in the 1980s, the 90s, and now today. And in some ways, it is this kind of hybrid flower situation where all of the things they're doing looks like they're creating what will be a safe haven for Bitcoiners in the future. This is a country that is on the side of people looking to mitigate the trouble of central banking and central planning, and is willing to say the things that maybe not everyone agrees with, but that at least will help change things. So my example of a country maybe getting over the hump first, maybe getting through World War III first, maybe it's just getting worse, we don't know. But in my worldview, these guys are a little ahead right now. Maybe not in the ways everyone can see, but in the ways that are going to be helpful, I think, especially if you believe this sort of hybrid flower theory, because I think a lot what's going on in Korea can actually come to America later. And it might be them who bails us out. World War III might end totally different than World War II. It might be Latin Americans who don't have their central banks, Koreans who don't have their central banks, Africans who don't have their central banks coming to bail us Americans out. Not me, but other people. So there you go. That's the episode of the Breakup today. Deha Mingu.
Nolan, there's a lot of stuff I want to unpack there. A lot of good stuff, though, if you've got a little bit of time.
Sure.
So going back to the baseball analogy, for people that don't know who Ichiro is, I mean, he's, you know, in my right, a legend, and I watched him growing up. Not even for just the style that he played. He's a fantastic player. And I even remember playing in backyard baseball. I know it's the character version of him, but he was always fast, great at base running, great at fielding, great at hitting, just all around great player.
Well, he was the greatest, other than probably Barry Bonds, who I think, as far as I'm concerned, whether we like him or not, he's the greatest hitter that ever lived. And no one's ever been feared like that. No one's ever hit a ball like that. But I'd say the greatest all around that I ever saw is Ichiro. I saw him throw a couple balls from center field. I couldn't believe it, you know, like I couldn't believe the arm this guy had. And it, you know, he could hit a home run if he felt like it. When he played for the Yankees, remember, he decided to whack a couple. He's hit a couple home runs, you know, why not?
And he played well into his 40s, and it wasn't like he was bad. It was like he decided when he wanted to hang up. I mean, most people don't have careers like that. And I mean, people said his work ethic was unrivaled. And that's part of the reason he was able to play to 40. And he just decided, you know, it's time for me to go away. So it actually ties in perfectly to Stephen A. Smith. You know the sportscaster, the guy that's very broad. I know Q's laughing on the other end. So Stephen A. made a comment, and I won't even call this, it's not a racist comment. I think people took it out of context in this day and age, but he said, no one's ever going to watch Ohtani be the face of Major League Baseball. And I thought it was an error. I don't think he was trying to be malicious in saying, oh, Ohtani's Japanese of nationality, but he was saying, oh, he's not marketable because he doesn't speak English. He always needs a translator. But when I tune in to LA Angels games, and I have no right, like I don't follow them, they're not in the Mets division, and watching Ohtani play, the skinny Japanese kid, my apologies, a very strong Japanese guy, throw 99 miles an hour, only to then, instead of being a sport that has designated hitters in his division, go behind the plate and blast a home run. You can't not watch this. If you love baseball, it is fantastic. I don't know if you want to comment.
No,
on that.
I'm with you. I barely watch baseball these days, but Ohtani is definitely someone who I'll tune in for, just to see the circus show of it. It's not. We thought that was done forever, that no one could ever do that again. I mentioned Babe Ruth in the show. Babe Ruth used to do that. That's what he used to do. He's a pitcher and a hitter, but it was like something people did 100 years ago, and now we got a guy doing it again. Q, you're a baseball fan?
I'm a Red Sox fan. On the topic of baseball, because it literally broke 5 minutes ago, baseball is back. Opening day looks like it will be April 7th for those who actually care.
So
not official.
Baseball is never back for Montreal, I understand. It's not back.
I will say on a different lens of that, I think Stephen A's comments were so beyond ignorant, because this idea of the Americanization, I butchered that word a little bit, but the Americanization of sports, and specifically the fact that like our figures need to be English speakers. I'm sorry, the best young player in the NBA right now, like barely can speak English. If you listen to Luka Doncic actually perform in an interview, and all of these sports leagues have been trying to become global sports. So whether or not we in America agree with the next big baseball, basketball, whatever sport star being our own like national citizen or being from somewhere else, I think it's an ignorant way to look at the lens of sports, but that's just purely from the business side of it, in my opinion.
I'll say
nothing to do with your
back.
guys' conversation. I just wanted to chime in that baseball's back.
Yeah.
We like baseball. I'll counter just with a quick observation. I'm not sure if it's still true, and it's not racist, but it's definitely racial, what I'm about to say, which is that Stephen A. Smith might just be pointing out what I understand as a reality, that there aren't really any African American stars in baseball anymore. That just somehow isn't. It's not. Most of them went to basketball. Most of them went to football. I mean, there's definitely a lot of Latin American stars, but that's African American. You know, African American. You have to be born in the United States.
I mean, a lot of that in the conversation that like I've heard people from those communities talk about is like, well, when you watch baseball, you see white guys and you see Hispanic players. They don't feel that representation. And then when you go and watch football, when you go and watch basketball, it's like, okay, these are the people who look like me. I think there are slowly starting to be a couple. I think it actually was the Atlanta Braves who have a few African-American athletes, and because Atlanta is such a heavy African-American community, which is perfect because what I want to talk about in a little bit has a lot to do with the African-American community in Atlanta. Specifically though, it is that lack of representation, and whatever has caused that, whether it's, for example, players very adamantly, my Boston Red Sox are blacklisted by a lot of African-American players in saying like, I will never wear that jersey. Those fans are the worst of the worst. There's definitely degrees of that, but I think it just really goes back to, unfortunately, there's not enough representation for them. Hockey, a perfect example of, they literally tokenize the like one or two athletes that are black to like put them on this pedestal so that other kids who are African-American or are black are actually paying attention and saying this is a viable sport. Hockey is a whole other beast unto itself because of the high cost of just getting involved, the equipment costs.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Sports
as
like,
a Canadian, it's absurd.
And
I can't believe
football carries those costs as well too. It is at least at the school level, schools tend to cover that cost, but when you're younger than that, it's tough. Basketball, soccer, baseball, you don't need a ton. You really don't need a ton of equipment to get started, and that's why those sports tend to, I think.
Well, I'm practicing my own form of imperialism on this island, where I'm encouraging all these cricket players to forget it, play baseball, make some money. What are you doing? Like, stop the thing with the arm and all this stuff. It's stupid.
But that idea of monetize. So I have a crazy theory that I've been trying to do a little bit more research on, but I don't think in my lifetime we have ever seen so many sports franchises listed publicly as being for sale. This might have been the case that they just weren't publicized because of the internet, because of how quickly information is shared now that we're being told this. I don't buy into that. I genuinely think, okay, this is
I've met a few owners of teams,
Mhm.
and what my observation is that it's owning a team is now the ultimate social club.
Oh, yes.
And I don't think it's actually done, what teams for sale and all that stuff. Like whatever it was in the old days, it was a social club, but it was still more of like entertainment business. Now I think just the owners themselves are in this special rarefied community of and I think that's the purpose.
There's a second layer to that though, because I think in the past it has been, however, they've reached this critical point where the TV deals are so large that you are actually starting to see real money by owning a team. Whereas these were loss leaders. I put it in quotes because I don't buy.
That's even why we're talking about having a team again in Montreal, because now that it's not really the gate, it doesn't matter. It's a TV contract. And the truth is there's 2 cell phone providers in Canada. One of them owns one team. Well, right. They got they got a lot of time on TV to spill now. So, and baseball is the ultimate content machine. There is no sport better at content than baseball. It's every day for 6 months, pre-game, post-game. That's 6 hours of baseball a day for 6 months. 6 hours, all good primetime hours for half the year. There's no better commercial product in the world for sports. And that's why baseball players are collectively the highest paid athletes on earth, more than soccer. Soccer individually can be higher. F1 produces a couple of the highest paid athletes or whatever. But the average, there's no better job in baseball than left-handed relief pitcher who makes $10 million a year to get out 2 batters every 3 days. There's no better deal. There's no better deal. There's nothing. And that's what I tell the cricket guys down here. I'm like, you doing all this stuff with cricket, where are you going to go? Where are you going to go? Like England or
New Zealand
Australia
or
New Zealand or India? I mean, maybe India can do it actually. But I mean, they should all just play baseball. It's so much more money. And they make it. They're good.
So on that topic, the point I'm trying to make is essentially because there are so many teams being introduced for sale, despite contracts are going to keep going higher, despite players making record deals, I think this is the peak. This is peak sports, peak income levels, and we're going to start to see a decline.
On Clown World, we talk about ending of things, beginning of things. All this national anthem business started with World War II. They came back, the sports got going, they sang the anthem. So it's over at the end of the Clown World thing. There's no more national anthems happening before games. There's none of this stuff. It's all gone. As America started fighting, especially around election stuff, one of my friends who loves sports was really angry about everything that's happening. He's, why don't these people just F off, I said, I think they're just gonna F off. He goes, good, I want to get back to stuff. Oh, I said, oh, you thought you'd still have stuff after. No, there's no sports anymore. They're gone. Like, you thought there's still like people would go to the Olympics and all that. It's done. Like, if you're going to kick out half the population, they're not going to participate. They're just not going to.
Yeah. And I guess going back to that as well, we're kind of seeing there is globalization through Bitcoin. It's a global currency, but then there's the globalists that they want centralization. And even look at Roman Abramovich. I know Q and I both like teams in London. I'm not a Chelsea fan. I am a Tottenham fan. He's an Arsenal fan, but one of our rivals is Chelsea. What they're doing to Roman Abramovich is insane. He's obviously a Russian billionaire. He owns Chelsea FC, the football club. And they're basically they're not forcing him to sell, but basically they're stripping away his revenue just through his association through Putin. And while I don't like Roman Abramovich just because he is the owner of a team that I oppose, I don't think this is a fair way to do that. Like, this is unfair and unjust. There's a couple of American players on the team that I support, and
they can't even get paid now, right?
There's blocks on the way they can get paid.
They can't sell tickets.
It also hinders
only
the players.
Season ticket holders.
The players the team is only allowed to travel and spend up to, I think, 20,000 euros. So you're trying to house 23 guys, the whole coaching staff, for $20,000. I mean, if
they're going to have to make like a major league movie,
No, exactly. Are they going to be staying in hostels in Europe to play games? Like
here's the truth, though. Here's the truth. Cool. The only person that none of those sanctions or rules that have been doled onto Chelsea will affect?
I have no idea. Go ahead.
Romanov. He doesn't give a shit. He doesn't need the. He
Oh
doesn't
yeah,
need
no,
the
he doesn't
income.
need the money.
He
That's
doesn't
the
need,
point.
the players need that. The players need, the team is struggling. They're in third, and hopefully Arsenal will whoop them enough to send them back down and out of Champions League contention. Yeah, I'm not biased
I
at all.
stayed for a little while in London, right by the Arsenal stadium, so I got to see a lot of activity.
I'm so jealous. I'm
cool
so
part,
jealous. Like
That's
on my bucket list is to see Arsenal live.
I didn't go into the stadium. I just was around, like, but I was there for a few weeks, and every time my Airbnb was there, and every time there was a game, it was.
I'll pull it back in here. Q, I went to 2 games at White Hart Lane before they closed down the old stadium, the one that was built in 1899, and I saw it in 2017 before they knocked it down to build the new White Hart Lane Stadium. Q, the soccer experiences in Europe, literally, I love football. I've been to basketball games. I've been to this next level. Like, the
violence. The violence is pretty bad.
I was lucky that there was no violence at the games that I went to. It was very civil, but
I have a great, really fun story about European soccer. I met my roommate when I was a student in France because he had a UP t-shirt. UP was the mascot of the Montreal Expos, and it was like my first night at orientation or whatever. I was like, how'd you get that UP t-shirt? And he goes, oh, when I was a kid, I was in Miami or whatever, West Palm Beach for spring training, and I saw the Expos and I got the ticket. It was crazy. So he became my roommate. A year later, I went and visited him. It turns out that not only did he love the mascot, the owner of the Munich 1860 football team. There's 2 teams in Munich. There's 1860, which is the Lowenbrau, the beer, and then the Bayern. Yeah, they both play in the Olympic Stadium. Now in the Allianz, but at the time that I went, it was still the 72 Olympic Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out he's the actual mascot. He invented the mascot. They don't have mascots there. And so because he liked UP, he knew the owner of the team. They gave him the lion suit for Lowenbrau to be the mascot. And I went to see him one day, and he actually let me be the mascot. And I got to go in Olympic Stadium with like 70,000 fans as a lion and cruising around. But the people are really violent. I went and tried to heckle the other fans like you would if you were UP in America, like, you know, the Philly Fanatic or any of these guys. You could go play around with other people in the thing, you know, the opposition team. No. They threatened to kill me, throwing batteries at my head. They have to cage in the visiting fans. They have to cage them in. They can't be allowed in the general public. So wild stuff, you know?
Yeah, I wasn't there for any derbies. It was just like local teams playing Tottenham. So that's why
it's the best, though. It is fun. It is fun. Yeah.
It is incredible. All right. So tying back to South Korea and Yoon Suk Yeol, I don't know if I pronounced that right, but I guess I have 2 quick questions for you, Nolan. So it's very interesting that obviously the conservative politician that he is trying to cut all these things. And I would say that's good for the taxpayer or the individual, because their taxes in theory should go down. But if you are someone that's more liberal or even just a politician or someone that kind of works off of the government's gloat, so we could call it, he's basically coming for your jobs.
Yep.
So I guess obviously you said it was kind of very much the Trump-Hillary, campaign or at least election. So I guess a lot of people are pissed about this. And do you think he'll follow through with his things? Because we see with politicians time and time again, I'm going to cut this, I'm going to do this, but then he gets in and gives the jobs to his cronies or his friends.
A little bit like we discussed yesterday with the Russian tractor story and their incompetence and how they go about firing people who don't come through and all that. So Korea, I guess you could say the most powerful part of their political process is the public investigatory unit. The ability
like
to
their IRS, basically?
A little bit, but I would combine it with the IRS. Yeah, like IRS, it would be like a special counsel with teeth more. Like a special counsel that has, that's generally how America has done these things. They create a special counsel, give them powers. I don't know if American system really uses one institution other than the White House to push things and bully people around within its system. But in Korea, what they do use is this prosecutorial public prosecutor. They have extraordinary powers and generally are not partisan, is not the right word. They're certainly partisan. but they basically just, it's constant warfare. They're just constantly throwing the other team in jail. So this guy's not through anything because that was his job before. He was a public prosecutor. So methinks he has a lot of enemies. My bet is, like Trump, the people you just beat are not really beaten, and it's not, an election isn't enough. So I don't think Korea is going to be happy days tomorrow, but I think this guy at least showed the model that Trump started, and showed that if you shave off some of the craziness of Trump, there's a viable winning strategy here for lots of jurisdictions around the world anyway to copy. And the bet always was, my thought when I first saw Trump was, it wasn't a left or right thing. This is like a new reality, right? And it's going to force people to see a new reality more than they would have been able if you showed them, right? They were going to see it for themselves because it was going to be so shocking and jarring. And that's the piece that this guy managed to do. And the shocking stuff, I think, whether or not the reaction, it's third law, it might go the other way. It could go back the other way. They might be further in the clown world in 4 years. But right now, the prediction that I have, based on what I know, based on their understanding of currency manipulation, based where they are in this hybrid thing, right? They were an American colony who we just thought was always going to keep buying the hamburgers, right? Like they were just going to keep buying the hamburgers, right? Like we were making American burgers here. Like people line up for the burgers, they're there. And they thought we were just going to keep selling the debt. They were just going to keep buying it and selling us stuff. The argument is always, well, if the demand goes away, who's making them have demand for these American dollars? Why do they need to keep fighting to devalue their dollar? It's basically a stable coin, right? It's basically a stable coin. And you've got a guy who's saying, well, we're going to unpeg it, more or less going to unpeg it. And I don't think any of us know the real answer of what happens when you unpeg this stuff. Is beyond our mental capacity, but it looks like over half the country is willing to go over the deep end and try something new. So could certainly flip back, but my prediction is this is going to stick, and he'll have plenty of troubles. And I'll doubt what I'm saying now at some point within the next 4 years. But from where I sit, I think he can do it. I think he can do it.
Nolan, one last thing. So I know you're talking about the younger ones are definitely more conservative, or they seem to be going more conservative. Where
traditional, I'd say traditional. Like,
okay.
like I don't think there's no like I don't think this is any one of these. It's not a homosexual thing or a trans thing, or like none of that is at issue here, right? Mm-hmm. It's literally, does someone stay home? Do you have daycare? Do both parents work? Is someone making the food? What are we doing with the kids? Why is our birth rate so terrible? We're going to collapse. How did this happen? Okay. So they definitely blame it on the West. They definitely, like, there is this thing that Western feminism, like, so here's another weird part of the campaign. Several prominent feminists peeled off and went with him. Prominent left-wing feminists peeled off during the campaign and joined his campaign.
That's interesting. So I guess my question then to complete the thought was, why are the youngers going more traditional where the older generations are going more modern? You would think, being an American, I would think that those would be flipped. And that's just me just looking at it from that standpoint.
I haven't been since 2019 because of COVID and all that stuff. My bet is it's the same thing you'll notice. If you're watching mainstream media in our world, you have brain damage. And if you get your information the best you can from different sources and from people who are not actively trying to brainwash you, you'll probably see the world a different way. So I think that their dichotomy is very similar to what we recognize. So the old people are sitting in front of their cable news. And if you watch speaking of hybrid flowers, their cable news is Walter Cronkite never left. I mean, this is like the most boring reading of news from the 1970s with the most dramatic intonation. They put like dramatic music, election 2022, the screw ups, the highs, the lows. It's a reality show there. And if you watch it on the mainstream media, way more so. They give out every news bulletin like they're reading the like they're reading the capitulation of Japan in the Second World War. Like it's the most important news that they've ever delivered. You could there's a lot of jokes out there, like memes of them trying to do how serious their newscasters are. I hung out with a lot of the newscasters there. I actually knew most of the mainstream media when I was there, and would make fun of them personally at the bar at night because I was hanging out in shady places with these people, and they would just be totally normal when they were like that, because it was a job, and reading the news is a serious job there. And they would, a lot of those newscasters had spent time in America or some other European place. And then socially, they would spend time afterwards. Once a Korean would do that, they have a lot of trouble spending time all the time with local Koreans who don't go out of the country. So they start hanging out in the expat neighborhoods. That's how I got to know them. And there was one bar in particular it was Mos Eisley, man. It was fucking crazy. Like arms dealers, the kind of people who can cross the North Korean border on foot and are allowed to, right? Not like.
So it's kind of rough and tumble kind of bar. All right. Nolan, thanks so much. Q, if you have anything else to add, thank you so much for the breakup segment. I always love these segments.
We love Korea. We love coming on the show.
No, really quickly, did you see the news out of Atlanta with Ryan Coogler or no?
No.
Okay. No, I mean, you're welcome to stay on. I wanted to discuss this on the show because this is the first major, like, notable figure example in America that proves the use cases for Bitcoin.
Well, I'll go check it out because I agree with you on Atlanta. To me, I've always expressed Atlanta as the capital of African American culture, and other than I lived in Bed-Stuy, which I would say is another one, but Bed-Stuy is lost in the sea of New York City, but still an amazing place, and I believe the most African American demographically concentrated neighborhood in America, maybe something like that. But I'd say Atlanta culturally is definitely it's a whole city of success and an amazing testament.
No, absolutely. We'll take a quick commercial break, and then Chris and I, and if Nolan, you want to stick around, you're more than welcome to, but no stress.
Hitting the beach, guys.
Go to the beach. I'm so jealous. We're going to break down what happened to Ryan Coogler and just discuss it as to, yet again, why Bitcoin fixes this. So stick around. We'll be back momentarily. And in the meantime, use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your Bitcoin 22 tickets. Oh, we are live. Ha ha ha. Welcome back. Thank you for sticking around. Today's going to be a little bit longer, and I apologize. I've got 15% left on my laptop before that dies. So we have a little bit of a shot clock. For those who didn't see this, a video went viral on Instagram and on Twitter, essentially any social media platform that you frequent or use. Ryan Coogler, who's the director of Black Panther, Creed, and is nominated for an Academy Award, was nominated for an Academy Award last year for Judas and the Black Messiah. This is a very notable director, filmmaker, someone who, especially when it comes to African-American stories and voices, has established himself as the marquee name to do that. When I worked in Hollywood, the dream of everyone was to be in the next Ryan Coogler film. Yesterday, Ryan Coogler went to Bank of America to use his own bank account and requested to withdraw $12,000 of cash out of his own account. He entered in his own debit card, he showed his ID, and entered his own PIN number. Then the bank teller and manager called the police, thinking that this Black man was trying to rob them or scam them or whatever. This man is a very well-off individual. He is Creed and Black Panther alone probably covered him, his kids' futures, and his grandkids' futures, the amount of money he should have made on those deals. And if not, Coogler, your agent screwed you. You should have given me a call. to be told, no, you can't take out the $12,000 in your bank account, to be told, hey, I think you're robbing us, to be told, we're going to call the cops, and to have a gun pointed at you or taken out of holsters and cocked just because you wanted to withdraw money. I'm sorry, but I am furious. And if you believe in Bitcoin as much as I do about how it helps prevent entities from blocking you from accessing your money, like we saw up north in Canada, like we see over in both Ukraine and Russia, this should anger you in the same way, if not more, because this is happening on our soil. Bank of America did this. This isn't whatever made up local bank chain. This isn't some bank down in whatever nondescript developing country. This is in Atlanta, in the United States. A man was told, no, you cannot access the money in your account. On top of that, we're going to call the cops because you tried to. I'm sorry, but it gets me fucking angry. And I'm really trying to be better about not cursing on the show, but it's blasphemous. And I'm going to put a call to action. Everyone watching this video in the future, watching this video right now, if you are a Bitcoiner and a real Bitcoiner, this should upset you. This should absolutely upset you, because it could tomorrow be you. It could tomorrow be you going to Wells Fargo. It could be you tomorrow going to Chase or whatever bank you bank at, because now Pandora's box has been opened here in this country. In this country, a man was told, no, you cannot take out $12,000 cash because I don't believe it's yours. What the hell is going on? I need to calm down for a second. Chris, please start talking.
No, IQ, I think that was really well said. I'm not going to do it any better. And I guess I'm not going to say the irony, but it's like he was Atlanta still has a lot of COVID restrictions. So he was in with a mask. And I know you even said to me earlier that he actually has a speech impediment, which I did not know. So he prefers to not talk a lot of times, or even just communicate through email, text, whatever. And I heard that, so one, he's wearing a mask. I think he was wearing glasses because it's bright in Atlanta, it's spring, middle of the day. I think he slid a piece of paper that said, I'd like to withdraw $12,000 from my account. It wasn't like he was mincing words and like, I have a gun, give me $12,000. It's not like this is a holdup, give me $12,000. It's not like it said $12,000. The dude gave a note, okay, a little sketchy. But then once he hands your ID and his bank card, it should be like, okay, maybe the bank teller got spooked and hit the button thinking that, he was robbing them. But once the guy starts handing his ID and his bank card, it's like, oh, okay, this guy's withdrawing from his own account. So it's really crazy that something like this can happen. And Bitcoiners have been right. I hate saying I told you so, but what happened in Canada? What happened in Ukraine? What happened in Russia? I'm not even going to name the politicians that say, oh, Russians are using this to avoid sanctions. It's like, yeah, ordinary, everyday Russians that are like you and Niku, that go to work Monday through Friday. They have a 9 to 5. They provide for their families. And then all of a sudden they're getting cut off from the SWIFT system. They don't even probably know what the SWIFT system was until this occurred. And then they're telling them they can't withdraw cash or rubles. They can't get US dollars. They can't wire money to family members in countries abroad. If they have a son or daughter studying in other countries, very common in Europe and Asia for this to occur, they're cut off from their family members. So this is it's a form of speech. It's a form of hindering people's livelihoods and survival. We've got very bad things happening while people are propping up Ukraine. And don't get me wrong, I fully support Ukrainians that are fleeing. And, I didn't want this attack to happen or to occur. I'm not going to pretend like I know everything that's going on with it, but Putin should be ashamed of doing this. But then to hinder I think 130 million Russians that live or people that reside in Russia, it's just insane. And to Q's point, if you think that this can't happen here, well, it just did. So it just did. Let me say that one more time. It just happened here in the United States. And we've already unpacked Pandora's box. It's only going to get worse. Bitcoiners need to keep reiterating this. And it's until it happens to you, then it's oh crap, maybe I should have listened. Q, I don't know if you want to expand on that. Now I'm heated up.
Dude, look, this is you may not know who Ryan Coogler is, and maybe most people don't. Directors do not necessarily get that same fanfare that Michael B. Jordan gets for starring in all of Coogler's films. They don't get the same fanfare as the actor on screen that you see. But if you know who he is, what he has done, and the type of stories that he puts forward, it's just saying it's wrong it doesn't do it justice to just how disgusting of an action this was. And again, I call upon everyone in the Bitcoin community. If you've ever said anything pro the trucker movement, against Trudeau for shutting down GoFundMe, if you've been condemning the actions of shutting down financial resources over in Eastern Europe, you should be condemning this right here in America as well, especially if you're American. I'm not going to assume that you are, but at this point, we're entering a point where financial regulation has entered Western developed countries in a way that's not ever been imagined possible. How does Bitcoin fix this? There is no centralized entity that tells you, no, you cannot access your money. So long as you take your coins off of exchanges. If you left it on Coinbase and you were in Russia and one of those 25,000 Russian accounts that Russia said, hey, no more, or that Coinbase said no more, you got screwed because you didn't take your coins off of exchanges. It's a two-part thing. It's take your wealth out of the US dollar. Let's vote with our dollars. Vote with our dollars by taking as much money out of it and putting it into the Bitcoin network. And then secondly, when you have Bitcoin, regardless of if you have a whole coin, if you have half, if you have a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, take it off of exchanges. It is time. We shouldn't have to keep repeating this, but this is a lesson that unfortunately people are going to have to learn the hard way. And we're watching people learn it in real time in different ways and in different capacities. And it's foolish of us to not pay attention to these lessons that are happening in front of our eyes. I'm so infuriated by this. And I hope that this call to action to the rest of the Bitcoin community sparks a similar fire. This happened in our backyard. Like, I'm going to go to Bank of America because I bank with them. I have to do and take care of some personal business. I literally have to go there later today. And
you got to go there to close your account.
I'll be honest. I when I was like talking to my dad about it, I was like, I need to go there this afternoon. And he teased me a little bit. He's like, be careful. You don't know what they're going to do if you take money there. You try to take money out. I'm like, honestly, I might have to record my entire interaction there because Jesus Christ, this is ridiculous.
Pay me in Bitcoin, Q. Pay me in Bitcoin.
Yeah. Just take your money off of exchanges, guys. Do not let it be there. Do not let some centralized entity have control over your hard work, over your time and hard work that has been equated down to dollars and cents. If anything, take it out of dollars and cents, put it in Bitcoin, get paid in Bitcoin, or do what I do and just stack a little bit of sats every day.
Yep. Q, if you want to send this out and we'll get out of here. Everyone, thanks for listening and watching on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, you name it.
Thank you guys. Episode 51. That's a wrap. We'll be back next week with a jam-packed week. And in the meantime, stack sats, everyone.
Use code YTMAG when you go to b.tc/conference. Get your tickets to Bitcoin Miami, April 6th through the 9th. I can't wait. Q can't wait. It is going to be an awesome, awesome time. All right. That's a wrap, everyone. We'll see you next week.